Chapter 96.
3 days after the scene we have just described, namely towards 5 o'clock in the afternoon of the day fixed for the signature of the contract between Mademoiselle Hugues Danglars and Andrea Cavalcanti, whom the banker persisted in calling Prince, a fresh breeze was stirring the leaves in the little garden in front of the Count of Monte Cristo's house, and the Count was preparing to go out. While his horses were impatiently pawing the ground, held in by the coachman, who had been seated a quarter of an hour on his box, the elegant phaeton with which we are familiar rapidly turned the angle of the entrance gate and cast out on the doorsteps Andrea Cavalcanti, as decked up and gay as if he were going to marry a princess. He inquired after the Count with his usual familiarity, and ascending lightly to the first story met him at the top of the stairs. The Count stopped on seeing the young man. As for Andrea, he was launched, and when he was once launched nothing stopped him. "Ah, good morning, my dear Count," said he. "Ah, Andrea," said the latter with his half-jesting tone. "How do you do? Charmingly, as you see. I am come to talk to you about 1,000 things, but first tell me, were you going out or just returned?" "I was going out, sir." "Then, in order not to hinder you, I will get up with you if you please in your carriage, and Tom shall follow with my phaeton in tow." "No," said the Count, with an imperceptible smile of contempt, for he had no wish to be seen in the young man's society. "No. I prefer listening to you here, my dear Andrea. We can chat better indoors, and there is no coachman to overhear our conversation." The Count returned to a small drawing-room on the first floor, sat down, and crossing his legs motioned to the young man to take a seat also. Andrea assumed his gayest manner. "You know, my dear Count," said he, "the ceremony is to take place this evening. At 9 o'clock, the contract is to be signed at my father-in-law's." "Ah, indeed," said Monte Cristo. "What, is it news to you? Has not M. Danglars informed you of the ceremony?" "Oh, yes," said the Count. "I received a letter from him yesterday, but I do not think the hour was mentioned. Possibly my father-in-law trusted to its general notoriety." "Well," said Monte Cristo, "you are fortunate, M. Cavalcanti. It is a most suitable alliance you are contracting, and Mademoiselle Danglars is a handsome girl." "Yes, indeed she is," replied Cavalcanti in a very modest tone. "Above all, she is very rich, at least I believe so," said Monte Cristo. "Very rich, do you think?" replied the young man. "Doubtless, it is said M. Danglars conceals at least half of his fortune, and he acknowledges 15 or 20 millions, said Andrea with a look sparkling with joy. "Without reckoning," added Monte Cristo, "that he is on the eve of entering into a sort of speculation already in vogue in the United States and in England, but quite novel in France." Yes, I know what you mean, the railway of which he has obtained the grant, is it not?" "Precisely. It is generally believed he will gain 10 millions by that affair." 10 millions, do you think so?" "It is magnificent," said Cavalcanti, who was quite confounded at the metallic sound of these golden words. "Without reckoning," replied Monte Cristo, "that all his fortune will come to you, and justly too, since Mademoiselle Danglars is an only daughter. Besides, your own fortune, as your father assured me, is almost equal to that of your betrothed. But enough of money matters. Do you know, Andrea, I think you have managed this affair rather skillfully." "Not badly, by any means," said the young man. "I was born for a diplomatist." "Well, you must become a diplomatist. Diplomacy, you know, is something that is not to be acquired. It is instinctive." "Have you lost your heart?" "Indeed, I fear it," replied Andrea, in the tone in which he had heard Durante or Val Ray reply to Alsace 21 at the th tree Fran eyes. "Is your love returned?" "I suppose so," said Andrea with a triumphant smile, "since I am accepted. But I must not forget one grand point." "Which?" "That I have been singularly assisted." "Nonsense! I have indeed." "By circumstances?" "No, by you, by me." "Not at all, Prince," said Monte Cristo, laying a marked stress on the title. "What have I done for you?" Are not your name, your social position, and your merit sufficient? No, said Andrea, no. It is useless for you to say so, Count. I maintain that the position of a man like you has done more than my name, my social position, and my merit. You are completely mistaken, sir, said Monte Cristo coldly, who felt the perfidious maneuver of the young man and understood the bearing of his words. You only acquired my protection after the influence and fortune of your father had been ascertained. For, after all, who procured for me, who had never seen either you or your illustrious father, the pleasure of your acquaintance? Two of my good friends, Lord Wilmore and the Abbe Busoni. What encouraged me not to become your surety but to patronize you? Your father's name, so well known in Italy and so highly honored. Personally, I do not know you. This calm tone and perfect ease made Andrea feel that he was, for the moment, restrained by a more muscular hand than his own, and that the restraint could not be easily broken through. Oh, then my father has really a very large fortune, Count. It appears so, sir, replied Monte Cristo. Do you know if the marriage settlement he promised me has come? I have been advised of it. But the 3 millions. The 3 millions are probably on the road. Then I shall really have them. Oh, well, said the Count, I do not think you have yet known the want of money. Andrea was so surprised that he pondered the matter for a moment. Then, arousing from his reverie, now, sir, I have one request to make to you, which you will understand, even if it should be disagreeable to you. Proceed, said Monte Cristo. I have formed an acquaintance, thanks to my good fortune, with many noted persons, and have, at least for the moment, a crowd of friends. But marrying, as I am about to do before all Paris, I ought to be supported by an illustrious name, and in the absence of the paternal hand, some powerful one ought to lead me to the altar. Now, my father is not coming to Paris, is he? He is old, covered with wounds, and suffers dreadfully, he says, in traveling. I understand. Well, I am come to ask a favor of you. Of me. Yes, of you, and pray what may it be? Well, to take his part. Ah, my dear sir. What? After the varied relations I have had the happiness to sustain towards you, can it be that you know me so little as to ask such a thing? Ask me to lend you 500,000, and although such a loan is somewhat rare, on my honor, you would annoy me less. Know, then, what I thought I had already told you, that in participation in this world's affairs, more especially in their moral aspects, the Count of Monte Cristo has never ceased to entertain the scruples and even the superstitions of the East. I, who have a seraglio at Cairo, one at Smyrna, and one at Constantinople, preside at a wedding. Never. Then you refuse me. Decidedly, and were you my son or my brother, I would refuse you in the same way. But what must be done? Said Andrea, disappointed. You said just now that you had 100 friends. Very true, but you introduced me at M. Danglars. Not at all. Let us recall the exact facts. You met him at a dinner party at my house, and you introduced yourself at his house. That is a totally different affair. Yes, but by my marriage you have forwarded that. Not in the least, I beg you to believe. Recollect what I told you when you asked me to propose you. Oh, I never make matches, my dear prince. It is my settled principle. Andrea bit his lips, but at least you will be there. Will all Paris be there? Oh, certainly. Well, like all Paris, I shall be there too, said the Count. And will you sign the contract? I see no objection to that. My scruples do not go thus far. Well, since you will grant me no more, I must be content with what you give me. But one word more, Count. What is it? Advice. Be careful. Advice is worse than a service. Oh, you can give me this without compromising yourself. Tell me what it is. Is my wife's fortune 500,000 livres? That is the sum M. Danglars himself announced. Must I receive it, or leave it in the hands of the notary? This is the way such affairs are generally arranged when it is wished to do them stylishly. Your two solicitors appoint a meeting, when the contract is signed, for the next or the following day. Then they exchange the two portions, for which they each give a receipt. Then, when the marriage is celebrated, they place the amount at your disposal as the chief member of the alliance. Because, said Andrea, with a certain ill-concealed uneasiness, I thought I heard my father-in-law say that he intended embarking our property in that famous railway affair of which you spoke just now. Well, replied Monte Cristo, it will be the way, everybody says, of trebling your fortune in 12 months. Baron Danglars is a good father and knows how to calculate. In that case, said Andrea, everything is all right, excepting your refusal, which quite grieves me. You must attribute it only to natural scruples under similar circumstances. Well, said Andrea, let it be as you wish. This evening, then, at 9 o'clock. Adieu till then. Notwithstanding a slight resistance on the part of Monte Cristo, whose lips turned pale but who preserved his ceremonious smile, Andrea seized the Countess' hand, pressed it, jumped into his phaeton and disappeared. The 4 or 5 remaining hours before 9 o'clock arrived, Andrea employed in riding, paying visits, designed to induce those of whom he had spoken to appear at the banker's in their gayest equipages, dazzling them by promises of shares in schemes which have since turned every brain, and in which Danglars was just taking the initiative. In fact, at 8:30 in the evening, the grand salon, the gallery adjoining, and the 3 other drawing-rooms on the same floor were filled with a perfumed crowd, who sympathized but little in the event, but who all participated in that love of being present wherever there is anything fresh to be seen. An academician would say that the entertainments of the fashionable world are collections of flowers which attract inconstant butterflies, famished bees, and buzzing drones. No one could deny that the rooms were splendidly illuminated. The light streamed forth on the gilt moldings and the silk hangings, and all the bad taste of decorations, which had only their richness to boast of, shone in its splendor. Mademoiselle Huguenot was dressed with elegant simplicity in a figured white silk dress, and a white rose half concealed in her jet-black hair was her only ornament, unaccompanied by a single jewel. Her eyes, however, betrayed that perfect confidence which contradicted the girlish simplicity of this modest attire. Madame Danglars was chatting at a short distance with Debray, Beauchamp, and C.H. Torrenaud. Debray was admitted to the house for this grand ceremony, but on the same plane with everyone else, and without any particular privilege. M. Danglars, surrounded by deputies and men connected with the revenue, was explaining a new theory of taxation, which he intended to adopt, when the course of events had compelled the government to call him into the ministry. Andrea, on whose arm hung one of the most consummate dandies of the opera, was explaining to him rather cleverly, since he was obliged to be bold to appear at ease, his future projects, and the new luxuries he meant to introduce to Parisian fashions with his 175,000 livres per annum. The crowd moved to and fro in the rooms like an ebb and flow of turquoises, rubies, emeralds, opals, and diamonds. As usual, the oldest women were the most decorated, and the ugliest the most conspicuous. If there was a beautiful lily or a sweet rose, you had to search for it, concealed in some corner behind a mother with a turban, or an ant with a bird of paradise. At each moment, in the midst of the crowd, the buzzing, and the laughter, the doorkeeper's voice was heard announcing some name well known in the financial department, respected in the army, or illustrious in the literary world, and which was acknowledged by a slight movement in the different groups. But for one whose privilege it was to agitate that ocean of human waves, how many were received with a look of indifference or a sneer of disdain? At the moment when the hand of the massive timepiece, representing Endymion asleep, pointed to 9 on its golden face, and the hammer, the faithful type of mechanical thought, struck 9 times, the name of the Count of Monte Cristo resounded in its turn, and as if by an electric shock all the assembly turned towards the door. The Count was dressed in black and with his habitual simplicity. His white waistcoat displayed his expansive noble chest, and his black stock was singularly noticeable because of its contrast with the deadly paleness of his face. His only jewelry was a chain, so fine that the slender gold thread was scarcely perceptible on his white waistcoat. A circle was immediately formed around the door. The Count perceived at one glance Madame Danglars at one end of the drawing-room, M. Danglars at the other, and Hugues nigh in front of him. He first advanced towards the Baroness, who was chatting with Madame de Villefort, who had come alone, Valentine being still an invalid. And without turning aside, so clear was the road left for him, he passed from the Baroness to Hugues, whom he complimented in such rapid and measured terms, that the proud artist was quite struck. Near her was Mademoiselle Louise d'Armilly, who thanked the Count for the letters of introduction he had so kindly given her for Italy, which she intended immediately to make use of. On leaving these ladies, he found himself with Danglars, who had advanced to meet him. Having accomplished these three social duties, Monte Cristo stopped, looking around him with that expression peculiar to a certain class, which seems to say, "I have done my duty, now let others do theirs." Andrea, who was in an adjoining room, had shared in the sensation caused by the arrival of Monte Cristo, and now came forward to pay his respects to the Count. He found him completely surrounded. All were eager to speak to him, as is always the case with those whose words are few and weighty. The solicitors arrived at this moment and arranged their scrawled papers on the velvet cloth embroidered with gold which covered the table prepared for the signature. It was a gilt table supported on lion's claws. One of the notaries sat down, the other remained standing. They were about to proceed to the reading of the contract, which half Paris assembled was to sign. All took their places, or rather the ladies formed a circle, while the gentlemen, more indifferent to the restraints of what Boileau calls the style nergique, commented on the feverish agitation of Andrea, on M. Danglars' riveted attention, Hugues' composure, and the light and sprightly manner in which the Baroness treated this important affair. The contract was read during a profound silence, but as soon as it was finished, the buzz was redoubled through all the drawing-rooms. The brilliant sums, the rolling millions which were to be at the command of the two young people, and which crowned the display of the wedding presents and the young lady's diamonds, which had been made in a room entirely appropriated for that purpose, had exercised to the full their delusions over the envious assembly. Mademoiselle Danglars' charms were heightened in the opinion of the young men, and for the moment seemed to outvie the sun in splendor. As for the ladies, it is needless to say that while they coveted the millions, they thought they did not need them for themselves, as they were beautiful enough without them. Andrea, surrounded by his friends, complimented, flattered, beginning to believe in the reality of his dream, was almost bewildered. The notary solemnly took the pen, flourished it above his head, and said, "Gentlemen, we are about to sign the contract." The Baron was to sign first, then the representative of M. Cavalcanti, Sr., then the Baroness, afterwards the future couple, as they are styled in the abominable phraseology of legal documents. The Baron took the pen and signed, then the representative. The Baroness approached, leaning on Madame de Villefort's arm. "My dear," said she, as she took the pen, "is it not vexatious? An unexpected incident in the affair of murder and theft at the Count of Monte Cristo's, in which he nearly fell a victim, deprives us of the pleasure of seeing M. de Villefort." "Indeed," said M. Danglars, in the same tone in which he would have said, "Oh, well, what do I care?" "As a matter of fact," said Monte Cristo, approaching, "I am much afraid that I am the involuntary cause of his absence." "What, you Count?" said Madame Danglars, signing. "If you are, take care, for I shall never forgive you." Andrea pricked up his ears. "But it is not my fault, as I shall endeavor to prove." Everyone listened eagerly. Monte Cristo, who so rarely opened his lips, was about to speak. "You remember," said the Count during the most profound silence, "that the unhappy wretch who came to rob me died at my house. The supposition is that he was stabbed by his accomplice, on attempting to leave it. Yes, said Danglars. In order that his wounds might be examined, he was undressed, and his clothes were thrown into a corner, where the police picked them up, with the exception of the waistcoat which they overlooked. Andrea turned pale and drew towards the door. He saw a cloud rising in the horizon which appeared to forebode a coming storm. Well, this waistcoat was discovered today, covered with blood and with a hole over the heart. The lady screamed, and 2 or 3 prepared to faint. It was brought to me. No one could guess what the dirty rag could be. I alone suspected that it was the waistcoat of the murdered man. My valet, in examining this mournful relic, felt a paper in the pocket and drew it out. It was a letter addressed to you, Baron. To me? Cried Danglars. Yes, indeed, to you. I succeeded in deciphering your name under the blood with which the letter was stained, replied Monte Cristo amid the general outburst of amazement. But asked Madame Danglars, looking at her husband with uneasiness, how could that prevent M. de Villefort in this simple way, madame? Replied Monte Cristo. The waistcoat and the letter were both what is termed circumstantial evidence. I therefore sent them to the King's attorney. You understand, my dear Baron, that legal methods are the safest in criminal cases. It was, perhaps, some plot against you. Andrea looked steadily at Monte Cristo and disappeared in the second drawing-room. Possibly, said Danglars, was not this murdered man an old galley slave? Yes, replied the Count, a felon named Cadraus. Danglars turned slightly pale. Andrea reached the anteroom beyond the little drawing-room. But go on signing, said Monte Cristo. I perceive that my story has caused a general emotion, and I beg to apologize to you, Baroness, and to Mademoiselle Danglars. The Baroness, who had signed, returned the pen to the notary. Prince Cavalcanti, said the latter. Prince Cavalcanti, where are you? Andrea, repeated several young people, who were already on sufficiently intimate terms with him to call him by his Christian name. Call the prince. Inform him that it is his turn to sign, cried Danglars to one of the floorkeepers. But at the same instant the crowd of guests rushed in alarm into the principal salon, as if some frightful monster had entered the apartments. Querens quem devoret. There was, indeed, reason to retreat, to be alarmed, and to scream. An officer was placing 2 soldiers at the door of each drawing-room, and was advancing towards Danglars, preceded by a commissary of police, girded with his scarf. Madame Danglars uttered a scream and fainted. Danglars, who thought himself threatened, certain consciences are never calm. Danglars, even before his guests, showed a countenance of abject terror. "What is the matter, sir?" asked Monte Cristo, advancing to meet the commissioner. "Which of you gentlemen," asked the magistrate without replying to the Count, "answers to the name of Andrea Cavalcanti?" A cry of astonishment was heard from all parts of the room. They searched, they questioned. "But who then is Andrea Cavalcanti?" asked Danglars in amazement. "A galley slave, escaped from confinement at Toulon." "And what crime has he committed?" "He is accused," said the commissary with his inflexible voice, "of having assassinated the man named Cadraus, his former companion in prison, at the moment he was making his escape from the house of the Count of Monte Cristo." Monte Cristo cast a rapid glance around him. Andrea was gone.
Chapter 97.
A few minutes after the scene of confusion produced in the salons of M. Danglars, by the unexpected appearance of the brigade of soldiers, and by the disclosure which had followed, the mansion was deserted with as much rapidity as if a case of plague or of cholera morbus had broken out among the guests. In a few minutes, through all the doors, down all the staircases, by every exit, everyone hastened to retire, or rather to fly. For it was a situation where the ordinary condolences, which even the best friends are so eager to offer in great catastrophes, were seen to be utterly futile. There remained in the banker's house only Danglars, closeted in his study, and making his statement to the officer of gendarmes. Madame Danglars, terrified, in the boudoir with which we are acquainted, and Huguenot, who with haughty air and disdainful lip had retired to her room with her inseparable companion, Mademoiselle Louise d'Armilly. As for the numerous servants, more numerous that evening than usual, for their number was augmented by cooks and butlers from the Café de Paris, venting on their employers their anger at what they termed the insult to which they had been subjected, they collected in groups in the hall, in the kitchens, or in their rooms, thinking very little of their duty, which was thus naturally interrupted. Of all this household, only two persons deserve our notice. These are Mademoiselle Hugues Danglars and Mademoiselle Louise d'Armilly. The betrothed had retired, as we said, with haughty air, disdainful lip, and the demeanor of an outraged queen, followed by her companion, who was paler and more disturbed than herself. On reaching her room, Hugues locked her door, while Louise fell on a chair. "Ah, what a dreadful thing," said the young musician. "Who would have suspected it? Andrea Cavalcanti, a murderer, a galley slave, escaped a convict." An ironical smile curled the lip of Hugues. "In truth, I was fated," said she. "I escaped the Morcerf only to fall into the Cavalcanti. Oh, do not confound the two, Hugues. Hold your tongue. The men are all infamous, and I am happy to be able now to do more than detest them. I despise them." "What shall we do?" asked Louise. "What shall we do? Yes. Why, the same we had intended doing 3 days since set off." "What? Although you are not now going to be married, you intend still?" "Listen, Louise. I hate this life of the fashionable world, always ordered, measured, ruled, like our music paper. What I have always wished for, desired, and coveted is the life of an artist, free and independent, relying only on my own resources and accountable only to myself. Remain here. What for? That they may try, a month hence, to marry me again. And to whom? M. Debray, perhaps, as it was once proposed. No, Louise, no. This evening's adventure will serve for my excuse. I did not seek one, I did not ask for one. God sends me this, and I hail it joyfully. How strong and courageous you are," said the fair, frail girl to her brunette companion. "Did you not yet know me? Come, Louise, let us talk of our affairs. The postchaise was happily bought 3 days since. Have you had it sent where we are to go for it?" "Yes. Our passport, here it is." And Hugues, with her usual precision, opened a printed paper and read, M. Edmond Dantès, 20 years of age, profession artist, hair black, eyes black, traveling with his sister. Capital. How did you get this passport? When I went to ask M. de Monte Cristo for letters to the directors of the theaters at Rome and Naples, I expressed my fears of traveling as a woman. He perfectly understood them, and undertook to procure for me a man's passport, and 2 days after I received this, to which I have added with my own hand, traveling with his sister. "Well," said Hugues cheerfully, "we have then only to pack up our trunks. We shall start the evening of the signing of the contract instead of the evening of the wedding, that is all. But consider the matter seriously, Hugues. Oh, I am done with considering. I am tired of hearing only of market reports, of the end of the month, of the rise and fall of Spanish funds, of Haitian bonds. Instead of that, Louise, do you understand? Air, liberty, melody of birds, plains of Lombardy, Venetian canals, Roman palaces, the Bay of Naples. How much have we, Louise?" The young girl to whom this question was addressed drew from an inlaid secretaire a small portfolio with a lock, in which she counted 23 bank notes. 23,000 francs, said she. "And as much, at least, in pearls, diamonds, and jewels," said Hugues. "We are rich. With 45,000 francs we can live like princesses for 2 years, and comfortably for 4. But before 6 months, you with your music, and I with my voice, we shall double our capital. Come, you shall take charge of the money, I of the jewel box, so that if one of us had the misfortune to lose her treasure, the other would still have hers left. Now, the portmanteau, let us make haste the portmanteau." "Stop," said Louise, going to listen at Madame Danglars' door. "What do you fear? That we may be discovered. The door is locked. They may tell us to open it. They may if they like, but we will not. You are a perfect Amazon, Hugues. and the two young girls began to heap into a trunk all the things they thought they should require. "There now," said Eugnai. "While I change my costume, do you lock the portmanteau." Louise pressed with all the strength of her little hands on the top of the portmanteau. "But I cannot," said she. "I am not strong enough. Do you shut it?" "Ah, you do well to ask," said Eugnai, laughing. "I forgot that I was Hercules and you only the pale Omphale." And the young girl, kneeling on the top, pressed the two parts of the portmanteau together, and Mademoiselle d'Armilly passed the bolt of the padlock through. When this was done, Eugnai opened a drawer of which she kept the key and took from it a wadded violet silk traveling cloak. "Here," said she, "you see I have thought of everything. With this cloak you will not be cold." "But you—" "Oh, I am never cold, you know. Besides, with these men's clothes, will you dress here?" "Certainly." "Shall you have time?" "Do not be uneasy, you little coward. All our servants are busy discussing the grand affair. Besides, what is there astonishing when you think of the grief I ought to be in, that I shut myself up? Tell me? No, truly you comfort me. Come and help me." From the same drawer she took a man's complete costume, from the boots to the coat, and a provision of linen, where there was nothing superfluous but every requisite. Then, with a promptitude which indicated that this was not the first time she had amused herself by adopting the garb of the opposite sex, Eugnai drew on the boots and pantaloons, tied her cravat, buttoned her waistcoat up to the throat, and put on a coat which admirably fitted her beautiful figure. "Oh, that is very good indeed, it is very good," said Louise, looking at her with admiration. "But that beautiful black hair, those magnificent braids which made all the ladies sigh with envy, will they go under a man's hat like the one I see down there?" "You shall see," said Eugnai. And with her left hand seizing the thick mass, which her long fingers could scarcely grasp, she took in her right hand a pair of long scissors, and soon the steel met through the rich and splendid hair, which fell in a cluster at her feet as she leaned back to keep it from her coat. Then she grasped the front hair, which she also cut off, without expressing the least regret. On the contrary, her eyes sparkled with greater pleasure than usual under her ebony eyebrows. "Oh, the magnificent hair," said Louise with regret. "And am I not 100 times better thus?" cried Eugnai, smoothing the scattered curls of her hair, which had now quite a masculine appearance. "And do you not think me handsomer so?" "Oh, you are beautiful, always beautiful," cried Louise. "Now where are you going?" "To Brussels, if you like. It is the nearest frontier. We can go to Brussels, Liege, Aix-la-Chapelle, then up the Rhine to Strasbourg. We will cross Switzerland and go down into Italy by the St. Gothard. Will that do?" "Yes." "What are you looking at?" "I am looking at you. Indeed, you are adorable like that. One would say you were carrying me off." "And they would be right, pardieu. Oh, I think you swore, Eugnai." And the two young girls, whom everyone might have thought plunged in grief, the one on her own account, the other from interest in her friend, burst out laughing, as they cleared away every visible trace of the disorder which had naturally accompanied the preparations for their escape. Then, having blown out the lights, the two fugitives, looking and listening eagerly, with outstretched necks, opened the door of a dressing-room which led by a side staircase down to the yard, Eugnai going first, and holding with one arm the portmanteau, which by the opposite handle Mademoiselle d'Armilly scarcely raised with both hands. The yard was empty, the clock was striking 12. The porter was not yet gone to bed. Eugnai approached softly and saw the old man sleeping soundly in an armchair in his lodge. She returned to Louise, took up the portmanteau, which she had placed for a moment on the ground, and they reached the archway under the shadow of the wall. Eugnai concealed Louise in an angle of the gateway, so that, if the porter chanced to awake, he might see but one person. Then, placing herself in the full light of the lamp which lit the yard gate, cried she, with her finest contralto voice, and rapping at the window. The porter got up as Eugnai expected, and even advanced some steps to recognize the person who was going out, but seeing a young man striking his boot impatiently with his riding-whip, He opened it immediately. Louise slid through the half-open gate like a snake and bounded lightly forward. Huguenot, apparently calm, although in all probability her heart beat somewhat faster than usual, went out in her turn. A porter was passing and they gave him the portmanteau. Then the two young girls, having told him to take it to No. 36, Rue de la Victoire, walked behind this man, whose presence comforted Louise. As for Huguenot, she was as strong as a Judith or a Delilah. They arrived at the appointed spot. Huguenot ordered the porter to put down the portmanteau, gave him some pieces of money, and having rapped at the shutter, sent him away. The shutter where Huguenot had rapped was that of a little laundress who had been previously warned and was not yet gone to bed. She opened the door. "Mademoiselle," said Huguenot, "let the porter get the post-chaise from the coach-house and fetch some post-horses from the hotel. Here are 5 francs for his trouble." "Indeed," said Louise, "I admire you, and I could almost say respect you." The laundress looked on in astonishment, but as she had been promised 20 louis, she made no remark. In a quarter of an hour the porter returned with a postboy and horses, which were harnessed, and put in the post-chaise in a minute, while the porter fastened the portmanteau on with the assistance of a cord and strap. "Here is the passport," said the postilion. "Which way are we going, young gentleman?" "To Fontainebleau," replied Huguenot with an almost masculine voice. "What do you say?" said Louise. "I am giving them the slip," said Huguenot. "This woman to whom we have given 20 louis may betray us for 40. We will soon alter our direction." And the young girl jumped into the britska, which was admirably arranged for sleeping in, without scarcely touching the step. "You are always right," said the music teacher, seating herself by the side of her friend. A quarter of an hour afterwards the postilion, having been put in the right road, passed with a crack of his whip through the gateway of the Barrière Saint-Martin. "Ah," said Louise, breathing freely, "here we are out of Paris." "Yes, my dear, the abduction is an accomplished fact," replied Huguenot. "Yes, and without violence," said Louise. "I shall bring that forward as an extenuating circumstance," replied Huguenot. These words were lost in the noise which the carriage made in rolling over the pavement of La Villette. M. Danglars no longer had a daughter.
Chapter 98.
And now let us leave Mademoiselle Danglars and her friend pursuing their way to Brussels, and return to poor Andrea Cavalcanti, so inopportunely interrupted in his rise to fortune. Notwithstanding his youth, Master Andrea was a very skillful and intelligent boy. We have seen that on the first rumor which reached the salon he had gradually approached the door, and crossing 2 or 3 rooms at last disappeared. But we have forgotten to mention one circumstance, which nevertheless ought not to be omitted. In one of the rooms he crossed, the trousseau of the bride-elect was on exhibition. There were caskets of diamonds, cashmere shawls, Valenciennes lace, English veils, and in fact all the tempting things, the bare mention of which makes the hearts of young girls bound with joy, and which is called the corbel. Now, in passing through this room, Andrea proved himself not only to be clever and intelligent, but also provident, for he helped himself to the most valuable of the ornaments before him. Furnished with this plunder, Andrea leaped with a lighter heart from the window, intending to slip through the hands of the gendarmes. Tall and well-proportioned as an ancient gladiator, and muscular as a Spartan, he walked for a quarter of an hour without knowing where to direct his steps, actuated by the sole idea of getting away from the spot where, if he lingered, he knew that he would surely be taken. Having passed through the Rue du Mont Blanc, guided by the instinct which leads thieves always to take the safest path, he found himself at the end of the Rue Lafayette. There he stopped, breathless and panting. He was quite alone. On one side was the vast wilderness of the Saint Lazare, on the other Paris enshrouded in darkness. "Am I to be captured?" he cried. "No, not if I can use more activity than my enemies. My safety is now a mere question of speed." At this moment he saw a cab at the top of the Faubourg Poissonnière. The dull driver, smoking his pipe, was plodding along toward the limits of the Faubourg Saint-Denis, where no doubt he ordinarily had his station. "Ho, friend," said Benedetto, "what do you want, sir?" Asked the driver, "Is your horse tired?" "Tired? Oh, yes, tired enough. He has done nothing the whole of this blessed day. 4 wretched fares and 20 sous over, making in all 7 francs, are all that I have earned, and I ought to take 10 to the owner. Will you add these 20 francs to the 7 you have?" "With pleasure, sir. 20 francs are not to be despised. Tell me what I am to do for this." "A very easy thing if your horse isn't tired. I tell you he'll go like the wind. Only tell me which way to drive." "Towards the Louvres." "Ah, I know the way you get good sweetened rum over there." "Exactly so. I merely wish to overtake one of my friends with whom I am going to hunt tomorrow at Chapelle-en-Serval. He should have waited for me here with a cabriolet till 11:30. It is 12, and tired of waiting he must have gone on. It is likely." "Well, will you try and overtake him?" "Nothing I should like better. If you do not overtake him before we reach Berget you shall have 20 francs, if not before Louvres 30. "And if we do overtake him?" 40, said Andrea after a moment's hesitation, at the end of which he remembered that he might safely promise. "That's all right," said the man. "Hop in and we ray off." Huo-opla. Andrea got into the cab, which passed rapidly through the Faubourg Saint-Denis, along the Faubourg Saint-Martin, crossed the barrier, and threaded its way through the interminable Villette. They never overtook the chimerical friend, yet Andrea frequently inquired of people on foot whom he passed, and at the inns which were not yet closed, for a green cabriolet and bay horse. And as there are a great many cabriolets to be seen on the road to the Low Countries, and as 9/10 of them are green, the inquiries increased at every step. Everyone had just seen it pass. It was only 500, 200, 100 steps in advance. At length they reached it, but it was not the friend. Once the cab was also passed by a calash rapidly whirled along by 2 post-horses. "Ah," said Cavalcanti to himself, "if I only had that Britska, those 2 good post-horses, and above all the passport that carries them on." And he sighed deeply. The calash contained Mademoiselle Danglars and Mademoiselle Armilly. "Hurry, hurry," said Andrea, "we must overtake him soon." And the poor horse resumed the desperate gallop it had kept up since leaving the barrier, and arrived steaming at Louvres. "Certainly," said Andrea, "I shall not overtake my friend, but I shall kill your horse, therefore I had better stop. Here are 30 francs. I will sleep at the Cheval Rouge and will secure a place in the first coach. Good night, friend." And Andrea, after placing 6 pieces of 5 francs each in the man's hand, leaped lightly on to the pathway. The cabman joyfully pocketed the sum, and turned back on his road to Paris. Andrea pretended to go towards the hotel of the Cheval Rouge, but after leaning an instant against the door, and hearing the last sound of the cab, which was disappearing from view, he went on his road, and with a lusty stride soon traversed the space of 2 leagues. Then he rested. He must be near Chapelle-en-Serval, where he pretended to be going. It was not fatigue that stayed Andrea here. It was that he might form some resolution, adopt some plan. It would be impossible to make use of a diligence, equally so to engage post-horses. To travel either way a passport was necessary. It was still more impossible to remain in the department of the Oise, one of the most open and strictly guarded in France. This was quite out of the question, especially to a man like Andrea, perfectly conversant with criminal matters. He sat down by the side of the moat, buried his face in his hands, and reflected. 10 minutes after he raised his head, his resolution was made. He threw some dust over the top-coat, which he had found time to unhook from the antechamber and button over his ball costume, and going to Chapelle-en-Serval, he knocked loudly at the door of the only inn in the place. The host opened. "My friend," said Andrea, "I was coming from Mortefontaine to Senlis, when my horse, which is a troublesome creature, stumbled and threw me. I must reach Campigny tonight. or I shall cause deep anxiety to my family. Could you let me hire a horse of you? An innkeeper has always a horse to let, whether it be good or bad. The host called the stable boy and ordered him to saddle Leblanc. Then he awoke his son, a child of 7 years, whom he ordered to ride before the gentleman and bring back the horse. Andrea gave the innkeeper 20 francs, and in taking them from his pocket dropped a visiting card. This belonged to one of his friends at the Café de Paris, so that the innkeeper, picking it up after Andrea had left, was convinced that he had led his horse to the Count of Monte on 25 Rue Saint-Dominique, that being the name and address on the card. Leblanc was not a fast animal, but he kept up an easy, steady pace. In 3 hours and a half Andrea had traversed the 9 leagues which separated him from Campigny, and 4 o'clock struck as he reached the place where the coaches stopped. There is an excellent tavern at Campigny, well remembered by those who have ever been there. Andrea, who had often stayed there in his rides about Paris, recollected the Bell and Bottle Inn. He turned around, saw the sign by the light of a reflected lamp, and having dismissed the child, giving him all the small coin he had about him, he began knocking at the door, very reasonably concluding that having now 3 or 4 hours before him, he had best fortify himself against the fatigues of the morrow by a sound sleep and a good supper. A waiter opened the door. "My friend," said Andrea, "I have been dining at St. Genoux Bois, and expected to catch the coach which passes by at midnight, but like a fool I have lost my way, and have been walking for the last 4 hours in the forest. Show me into one of those pretty little rooms which overlook the court, and bring me a cold fowl and a bottle of Bordeaux." The waiter had no suspicions. Andrea spoke with perfect composure. He had a cigar in his mouth, and his hands in the pocket of his top coat. His clothes were fashionably made, his chin smooth, his boots irreproachable. He looked merely as if he had stayed out very late, that was all. While the waiter was preparing his room, the hostess arose. Andrea assumed his most charming smile, and asked if he could have no 3, which he had occupied on his last stay at Campigny. Unfortunately, no 3 was engaged by a young man who was traveling with his sister. Andrea appeared in despair, but consoled himself when the hostess assured him that no 7, prepared for him, was situated precisely the same as no 3, and while warming his feet and chatting about the last races at Chantilly, he waited until they announced his room to be ready. Andrea had not spoken without cause of the pretty rooms looking out upon the court of the Belle Hotel, which with its triple galleries like those of a theater, with the jessamine and clematis twinning round the light columns, forms one of the prettiest entrances to an inn that you can imagine. The fowl was tender, the wine old, the fire clear and sparkling, and Andrea was surprised to find himself eating with as good an appetite as though nothing had happened. Then he went to bed and almost immediately fell into that deep sleep which is sure to visit men of 20 years of age, even when they are torn with remorse. Now, here we are obliged to own that Andrea ought to have felt remorse, but that he did not. This was the plan which had appealed to him, to afford the best chance of his security. Before daybreak he would awake, leave the inn after rigorously paying his bill and reaching the forest. He would, under pretense of making studies in painting, test the hospitality of some peasants, procure himself the dress of a woodcutter and a hatchet, casting off the lion's skin to assume that of the woodman. Then, with his hands covered with dirt, his hair darkened by means of a leaden comb, his complexion embrowned with a preparation for which one of his old comrades had given him the recipe, he intended, by following the wooded districts, to reach the nearest frontier, walking by night and sleeping in the day in the forests and quarries, and only entering inhabited regions to buy a loaf from time to time. Once past the frontier, Andrea proposed making money of his diamonds, and by uniting the proceeds to 10 banknotes he always carried about with him in case of accident, he would then find himself possessor of about 50,000 livres, which he philosophically considered as no very deplorable condition after all. Moreover, he reckoned much on the interest of the danglers to hush up the rumor of their own misadventures. These were the reasons which, added to the fatigue, caused Andrea to sleep so soundly. In order that he might wake early, he did not close the shutters, but contented himself with bolting the door and placing on the table an unclasped and long-pointed knife, whose temper he well knew, and which was never absent from him. About 7 in the morning, Andrea was awakened by a ray of sunlight, which played, warm and brilliant, upon his face. In all well-organized brains, the predominating idea, and there always is one, is sure to be the last thought before sleeping, and the first upon waking in the morning. Andrea had scarcely opened his eyes when his predominating idea presented itself, and whispered in his ear that he had slept too long. He jumped out of bed and ran to the window. A gendarme was crossing the court. A gendarme is one of the most striking objects in the world, even to a man void of uneasiness. But for one who has a timid conscience, and with good cause too, the yellow, blue, and white uniform is really very alarming. "Why is that gendarme there?" asked Andrea of himself. Then all at once he replied, with that logic which the reader has, doubtless, remarked in him, "There is nothing astonishing in seeing a gendarme at an inn. Instead of being astonished, let me dress myself." And the youth dressed himself with a facility his valet de chambre had failed to rob him of during the 2 months of fashionable life he had led in Paris. "Now then," said Andrea, while dressing himself, "I'll wait till he leaves, and then I'll slip away." And saying this, Andrea, who had now put on his boots and cravat, stole gently to the window, and a second time lifted up the muslin curtain. Not only was the first gendarme still there, but the young man now perceived a second yellow, blue, and white uniform at the foot of the staircase, the only one by which he could descend, while a third, on horseback, holding a musket in his fist, was posted as a sentinel at the great street door which alone afforded the means of egress. The appearance of the third gendarme settled the matter, for a crowd of curious loungers was extended before him, effectually blocking the entrance to the hotel. "They ray after me," was Andrea's first thought. Diable, a pallor overspread the young man's forehead, and he looked around him with anxiety. His room, like all those on the same floor, had but one outlet to the gallery in the sight of everybody. "I am lost," was his second thought, and indeed for a man in Andrea's situation, an arrest meant the assizes, trial, and death without mercy or delay. For a moment he convulsively pressed his head within his hands, and during that brief period he became nearly mad with terror. But soon a ray of hope glimmered in the multitude of thoughts which bewildered his mind, and a faint smile played upon his white lips and pallid cheeks. He looked around and saw the objects of his search upon the chimney-piece. They were a pen, ink, and paper. With forced composure he dipped the pen in the ink and wrote the following lines upon a sheet of paper. "I have no money to pay my bill, but I am not a dishonest man. I leave behind me as a pledge this pen, worth 10 times the amount. I shall be excused for leaving at daybreak, for I was ashamed." He then drew the pen from his cravat and placed it on the paper. This done, instead of leaving the door fastened, he drew back the bolts and even placed the door ajar, as though he had left the room, forgetting to close it, and slipping into the chimney like a man accustomed to that kind of gymnastic exercise. After replacing the chimney board, which represented Achilles with Deidamia, and effacing the very marks of his feet upon the ashes, he commenced climbing the hollow tunnel, which afforded him the only means of escape left. At this precise time, the first gendarme Andrea had noticed walked upstairs, preceded by the commissary of police, and supported by the second gendarme who guarded the staircase and was himself reinforced by the one stationed at the door. Andrea was indebted for this visit to the following circumstances. At daybreak, the telegraphs were set at work in all directions, and almost immediately the authorities in every district had exerted their utmost endeavors to arrest the murderer of Cadraus. Compagnie, that royal residence and fortified town, is well furnished with authorities, gendarmes, and commissaries of police. They therefore began operations as soon as the telegraphic dispatch arrived, and the Bell and Bottle being the best-known hotel in the town, they had naturally directed their first inquiries there. Now, besides the reports of the sentinels guarding the Hôtel de Ville, which is next door to the Bell and Bottle, it had been stated by others that a number of travelers had arrived during the night. The sentinel who was relieved at 6 o'clock in the morning remembered perfectly that, just as he was taking his post a few minutes past 4, a young man arrived on horseback, with a little boy before him. The young man, having dismissed the boy and horse, knocked at the door of the hotel, which was opened, and again closed after his entrance. This late arrival had attracted much suspicion, and the young man being no other than Andrea, the commissary and gendarme, who was a brigadier, directed their steps towards his room. They found the door ajar. "Oh," said the brigadier, who thoroughly understood the trick, "a bad sign to find the door open. I would rather find it triply bolted." And indeed, the little note and pin upon the table confirmed, or rather corroborated, the sad truth. Andrea had fled. We say corroborated, because the brigadier was too experienced to be convinced by a single proof. He glanced around, looked in the bed, shook the curtains, opened the closets, and finally stopped at the chimney. Andrea had taken the precaution to leave no traces of his feet in the ashes, but still, it was an outlet, and in this light was not to be passed over without serious investigation. The brigadier sent for some sticks and straw, and having filled the chimney with them, set a light to it. The fire crackled, and the smoke ascended like the dull vapor from a volcano, but still no prisoner fell down as they expected. The fact was that Andrea, at war with society ever since his youth, was quite as deep as a gendarme, even though he were advanced to the rank of brigadier, and quite prepared for the fire. He had climbed out on the roof and was crouching down against the chimney pots. At one time he thought he was saved, for he heard the brigadier exclaim in a loud voice to the 2 gendarmes, "He is not here." But venturing to peep, he perceived that the latter, instead of retiring, as might have been reasonably expected upon this announcement, were watching with increased attention. It was now his turn to look about him. The Hôtel de Ville, a massive 16th century building, was on his right. Anyone could descend from the openings in the tower and examine every corner of the roof below, and Andrea expected momentarily to see the head of a gendarme appear at one of these openings. If once discovered, he knew he would be lost, for the roof afforded no chance of escape. He therefore resolved to descend, not through the same chimney by which he had come up, but by a similar one conducting to another room. He looked around for a chimney from which no smoke issued, and having reached it, he disappeared through the orifice without being seen by anyone. At the same minute, one of the little windows of the Hôtel de Ville was thrown open, and the head of a gendarme appeared. For an instant it remained motionless as one of the stone decorations of the building. Then, after a long sigh of disappointment, the head disappeared. The brigadier, calm and dignified as the law he represented, passed through the crowd, without answering the 1,000 questions addressed to him, and re-entered the hotel. "Well?" asked the 2 gendarmes. "Well, my boys," said the brigadier, "the brigand must really have escaped early this morning, but we will send to the Villers-Cotterets and Noyon roads, and search the forest when we shall catch him, no doubt." The honorable functionary had scarcely expressed himself thus, in that intonation which is peculiar to brigadiers of the gendarmerie, when a loud scream, accompanied by the violent ringing of a bell, resounded through the court of the hotel. "Ah, what is that?" cried the brigadier. "Some traveler seems impatient," said the host. "What number was it that rang?" "Number 3. Run, waiter." At this moment the screams and ringing were redoubled. "Aha!" said the brigadier, stopping the servant. "The person who is ringing appears to want something more than a waiter. We will attend upon him with a gendarme." Who occupies number 3? The little fellow who arrived last night in a postchaise with his sister, and who asked for an apartment with 2 beds. The bell here rang for the 3rd time, with another shriek of anguish. "Follow me, Mr. Commissary," said the brigadier. "Tread in my steps." "Wait an instant," said the host. "Number 3 has 2 staircases, inside and outside." "Good," said the brigadier. "I will take charge of the inside one." "Are the carbines loaded?" "Yes, brigadier." "Well, you guard the exterior, and if he attempts to fly, fire upon him. He must be a great criminal from what the telegraph says." The brigadier, followed by the commissary, disappeared by the inside staircase, accompanied by the noise which his assertions respecting Andrea had excited in the crowd. This is what had happened. Andrea had very cleverly managed to descend 2/3 of the chimney, but then his foot slipped, and notwithstanding his endeavors, he came into the room with more speed and noise than he intended. It would have signified little had the room been empty, but unfortunately it was occupied. 2 ladies, sleeping in one bed, were awakened by the noise, and fixing their eyes upon the spot whence the sound proceeded, they saw a man. One of these ladies, the fair one, uttered those terrible shrieks which resounded through the house, while the other, rushing to the bell rope, rang with all her strength. Andrea, as we can see, was surrounded by misfortune. "For pity's sake," he cried, pale and bewildered, without seeing whom he was addressing, "for pity's sake do not call assistance. Save me, I will not harm you." "Andrea, the murderer," cried one of the ladies. "Huguenot, Mademoiselle Danglars," exclaimed Andrea, stupefied. "Help, help!" cried Mademoiselle Darmely, taking the bell from her companion's hand and ringing it yet more violently. "Save me, I am pursued," said Andrea, clasping his hands. "For pity, for mercy's sake, do not deliver me up." "It is too late, they are coming," said Huguenot. "Well, conceal me somewhere. You can say you were needlessly alarmed. You can turn their suspicions and save my life." The 2 ladies, pressing closely to one another and drawing the bedclothes tightly around them, remained silent to this supplicating voice, repugnance and fear taking possession of their minds. "Well, be it so," at length said Huguenot. "Return by the same road you came, and we will say nothing about you, unhappy wretch." "Here he is, here he is," cried a voice from the landing. "Here he is." "I see him." The brigadier had put his eye to the keyhole, and had discovered Andrea in a posture of entreaty. A violent blow from the butt end of the musket burst open the lock, 2 more forced out the bolts, and the broken door fell in. Andrea ran to the other door, leading to the gallery, ready to rush out. But he was stopped short, and he stood with his body a little thrown back, pale, and with the useless knife in his clenched hand. "Fly then," cried Mademoiselle Darmely, whose pity returned as her fears diminished. "Fly, or kill yourself," said Huguenot in a tone which a vestal in the amphitheater would have used when urging the victorious gladiator to finish his vanquished adversary. Andrea shuddered and looked on the young girl with an expression which proved how little he understood such ferocious honor. "Kill myself," he cried, throwing down his knife. "Why should I do so?" "Why, you said," answered Mademoiselle Danglars, "that you would be condemned to die like the worst criminals." "Bah," said Cavalcanti, crossing his arms, "one has friends." The brigadier advanced to him, sword in hand. "Come, come," said Andrea, "sheathe your sword, my fine fellow. There is no occasion to make such a fuss, since I give myself up," and he held out his hands to be manacled. The 2 girls looked with horror upon this shameful metamorphosis, the man of the world shaking off his covering and appearing as a galley slave. Andrea turned towards them and with an impertinent smile asked, "Have you any message for your father, Mademoiselle Danglars? For in all probability I shall return to Paris." Huguenot covered her face with her hands. "Oh, oh," said Andrea, "you need not be ashamed, even though you did post after me. Was I not nearly your husband?" And with this raillery Andrea went out, leaving the 2 girls a prey to their own feelings of shame and to the comments of the crowd. An hour after they stepped into their calash, both dressed in feminine attire. The gate of the hotel had been closed to screen them from sight, but they were forced, when the door was open, to pass through a throng of curious glances and whispering voices. Yugni closed her eyes, but though she could not see, she could hear, and the sneers of the crowd reached her in the carriage. "Oh, why is not the world a wilderness?" she exclaimed, throwing herself into the arms of Mademoiselle Armely, her eyes sparkling with the same kind of rage which made Nero wish that the Roman world had but one neck, that he might sever it at a single blow. The next day they stopped at the Hôtel de Flandre, at Brussels. The same evening Andrea was incarcerated in the conciergerie.
Chapter 99.
We have seen how quietly Mademoiselle Danglars and Mademoiselle Armely accomplished their transformation and flight, the fact being that everyone was too much occupied in his or her own affairs to think of theirs. We will leave the banker contemplating the enormous magnitude of his debt before the phantom of bankruptcy, and follow the Baroness, who, after being momentarily crushed under the weight of the blow which had struck her, had gone to seek her usual adviser, Lucien Debray. The Baroness had looked forward to this marriage as a means of ridding her of a guardianship which, over a girl of Yugni's character, could not fail to be rather a troublesome undertaking. For in the tacit relations which maintain the bond of family union, the mother, to maintain her ascendancy over her daughter, must never fail to be a model of wisdom and a type of perfection. Now, Madame Danglars feared Yugni's sagacity and the influence of Mademoiselle Armely. She had frequently observed the contemptuous expression with which her daughter looked upon Debray, an expression which seemed to imply that she understood all her mother's amorous and pecuniary relationships with the intimate secretary. Moreover, she saw that Yugni detested Debray, not only because he was a source of dissension and scandal under the paternal roof, but because she had at once classed him in that catalogue of bipeds whom Plato endeavors to withdraw from the appellation of men, and whom Diogenes designated as animals upon two legs without feathers. Unfortunately, in this world of ours, each person views things through a certain medium, and so is prevented from seeing in the same light as others, and Madame Danglars, therefore, very much regretted that the marriage of Yugni had not taken place, not only because the match was good, and likely to ensure the happiness of her child, but because it would also set her at liberty. She ran therefore to Debray, who, after having, like the rest of Paris, witnessed the contract scene and the scandal attending it, had retired in haste to his club, where he was chatting with some friends upon the events which served as a subject of conversation for 3/4 of that city known as the capital of the world. At the precise time when Madame Danglars, dressed in black and concealed in a long veil, was ascending the stairs leading to Debray's apartments, notwithstanding the assurances of the concierge that the young man was not at home, Debray was occupied in repelling the insinuations of a friend, who tried to persuade him that after the terrible scene which had just taken place he ought, as a friend of the family, to marry Mademoiselle Danglars and her 2 millions. Debray did not defend himself very warmly, for the idea had sometimes crossed his mind. Still, when he recollected the independent, proud spirit of Yugni, he positively rejected it as utterly impossible, though the same thought again continually recurred and found a resting place in his heart. Tea, play, and the conversation, which had become interesting during the discussion of such serious affairs, lasted till 1 o'clock in the morning. Meanwhile Madame Danglars, veiled and uneasy, awaited the return of Debray in the little green room, seated between 2 baskets of flowers, which she had that morning sent, and which, it must be confessed, Debray had himself arranged and watered with so much care that his absence was half excused in the eyes of the poor woman. At 20 minutes to 12, Madame Danglars, tired of waiting, returned home. Women of a certain grade are like prosperous grisettes in one respect: they seldom return home after 12 o'clock. The Baroness returned to the hotel with as much caution as Hugues used in leaving it. She ran lightly upstairs, and with an aching heart entered her apartment, contiguous, as we know, to that of Hugues. She was fearful of exciting any remark, and believed firmly in her daughter's innocence and fidelity to the paternal roof. She listened at Hugues' door, and hearing no sound tried to enter, but the bolts were in place. Madame Danglars then concluded that the young girl had been overcome with the terrible excitement of the evening, and had gone to bed and to sleep. She called the maid and questioned her. "Mademoiselle Hugues," said the maid, "retired to her apartment with Mademoiselle Armely. They then took tea together, after which they desired me to leave, saying that they needed me no longer." Since then the maid had been below, and like everyone else she thought the young ladies were in their own room. Madame Danglars, therefore, went to bed without a shadow of suspicion, and began to muse over the recent events. In proportion as her memory became clearer, the occurrences of the evening were revealed in their true light. What she had taken for confusion was a tumult. What she had regarded as something distressing was in reality a disgrace. And then the Baroness remembered that she had felt no pity for poor Merc D.S., who had been afflicted with as severe a blow through her husband and son. "Hugues," she said to herself, "is lost, and so are we. The affair, as it will be reported, will cover us with shame, for in a society such as ours satire inflicts a painful and incurable wound. How fortunate that Hugues is possessed of that strange character which has so often made me tremble." And her glance was turned towards heaven, where a mysterious providence disposes all things, and out of a fault, nay, even a vice, sometimes produces a blessing. And then her thoughts, cleaving through space like a bird in the air, rested on Cavalcanti. This Andrea was a wretch, a robber, an assassin, and yet his manners showed the effects of a sort of education, if not a complete one. He had been presented to the world with the appearance of an immense fortune, supported by an honorable name. How could she extricate herself from this labyrinth? To whom would she apply to help her out of this painful situation? Debray, to whom she had run with the first instinct of a woman towards the man she loves, and who yet betrays her, Debray could but give her advice. She must apply to someone more powerful than he. The Baroness then thought of M. de Villefort. It was M. de Villefort who had remorselessly brought misfortune into her family, as though they had been strangers. But no, on reflection, the procureur was not a merciless man, and it was not the magistrate, slave to his duties, but the friend, the loyal friend, who roughly but firmly cut into the very core of the corruption. It was not the executioner, but the surgeon, who wished to withdraw the honor of Danglars from ignominious association with the disgraced young man they had presented to the world as their son-in-law. And since Villefort, the friend of Danglars, had acted in this way, no one could suppose that he had been previously acquainted with, or had lent himself to, any of Andrea's intrigues. Villefort's conduct, therefore, upon reflection, appeared to the Baroness as if shaped for their mutual advantage. But the inflexibility of the procureur should stop there. She would see him the next day, and if she could not make him fail in his duties as a magistrate, she would, at least, obtain all the indulgence he could allow. She would invoke the past, recall old recollections. She would supplicate him by the remembrance of guilty, yet happy days. M. de Villefort would stifle the affair. He had only to turn his eyes on one side, and allow Andrea to fly, and follow up the crime under that shadow of guilt called contempt of court. And after this reasoning she slept easily. At 9 o'clock next morning she arose, and without ringing for her maid or giving the least sign of her activity, she dressed herself in the same simple style as on the previous night. Then running downstairs, she left the hotel, walked to the Rue de Provence, called a cab, and drove to M. de Villefort's house. For the last month this wretched house had presented the gloomy appearance of a lazaretto infected with the plague. Some of the apartments were closed within and without. The shutters were only open to admit a minute's air, showing the scared face of a footman, and immediately afterwards the window would be closed, like a gravestone falling on a sepulchre, and the neighbors would say to each other in a low voice, "Will there be another funeral today at the procuror's house?" Madame Danglars involuntarily shuddered at the desolate aspect of the mansion. Descending from the cab, she approached the door with trembling knees and rang the bell. 3 times did the bell ring with a dull, heavy sound, seeming to participate in the general sadness, before the concierge appeared and peeped through the door, which he opened just wide enough to allow his words to be heard. He saw a lady, a fashionable, elegantly dressed lady, and yet the door remained almost closed. "Do you intend opening the door?" said the Baroness. "First, madame, who are you? Who am I? You know me well enough." "We no longer know anyone, madame. You must be mad, my friend," said the Baroness. "Where do you come from?" "Oh, this is too much. Madame, these are my orders. Excuse me. Your name?" "The Baroness Danglars. You have seen me 20 times. Possibly, madame. And now, what do you want?" "Oh, how extraordinary. I shall complain to M. de Villefort of the impertinence of his servants." "Madame, this is precaution, not impertinence. No one enters here without an order from M. d'Avrigny or without speaking to the procureur." "Well, I have business with the procureur." "Is it pressing business?" "You can imagine so, since I have not even brought my carriage out yet. But enough of this. Here is my card. Take it to your master." "Madame will await my return." "Yes, go." The concierge closed the door, leaving Madame Danglars in the street. She had not long to wait. Directly afterwards the door was opened wide enough to admit her, and when she had passed through, it was again shut. Without losing sight of her for an instant, the concierge took a whistle from his pocket as soon as they entered the court, and blew it. The valet de chambre appeared on the doorsteps. "You will excuse this poor fellow, madame," he said, as he preceded the Baroness, "but his orders are precise, and M. de Villefort begged me to tell you that he could not act otherwise." In the court, showing his merchandise, was a tradesman who had been admitted with the same precautions. The Baroness ascended the steps. She felt herself strongly infected with the sadness which seemed to magnify her own, and still guided by the valet de chambre, who never lost sight of her for an instant, she was introduced to the magistrate's study. Preoccupied as Madame Danglars had been with the object of her visit, the treatment she had received from these underlings appeared to her so insulting that she began by complaining of it. But Villefort, raising his head, bowed down by grief, looked up at her with so sad a smile that her complaints died upon her lips. "Forgive my servants," he said, "for a terror I cannot blame them for. From being suspected, they have become suspicious." Madame Danglars had often heard of the terror to which the magistrate alluded, but without the evidence of her own eyesight, she could never have believed that the sentiment had been carried so far. "You too, then, are unhappy," she said. "Yes, madame," replied the magistrate. "Then you pity me." "Sincerely, madame." "And you understand what brings me here. You wish to speak to me about the circumstance which has just happened." "Yes, sir, a fearful misfortune." "You mean a mischance, a mischance," repeated the Baroness. "Alas, madame," said the procureur with his imperturbable calmness of manner, "I consider those alone misfortunes which are irreparable. And do you suppose this will be forgotten?" "Everything will be forgotten, madame," said Villefort. "Your daughter will be married tomorrow, if not today, in a week, if not tomorrow, and I do not think you can regret the intended husband of your daughter." Madame Danglars gazed on Villefort, stupefied to find him so almost insultingly calm. "Am I come to a friend?" she asked in a tone full of mournful dignity. "You know that you are, madame," said Villefort, whose pale cheeks became slightly flushed as he gave her the assurance. And truly this assurance carried him back to different events from those now occupying the Baroness and him. "Well then, be more affectionate, my dear Villefort," said the Baroness. "Speak to me not as a magistrate, but as a friend. and when I am in bitter anguish of spirit, do not tell me that I ought to be gay. Villefort bowed. When I hear misfortunes named, madame, he said, I have within the last few months contracted the bad habit of thinking of my own, and then I cannot help drawing up an egotistical parallel in my mind. That is the reason that by the side of my misfortunes yours appear to me mere mischances. That is why my dreadful position makes yours appear enviable. But this annoys you. Let us change the subject. You were saying, madame, I came to ask you, my friend, said the Baroness, what will be done with this impostor? Impostor, repeated Villefort. Certainly, madame, you appear to extenuate some cases and exaggerate others. Impostor, indeed. M. Andrea Cavalcanti, or rather M. Benedetto, is nothing more nor less than an assassin. Sir, I do not deny the justice of your correction, but the more severely you arm yourself against that unfortunate man, the more deeply will you strike our family. Come, forget him for a moment, and instead of pursuing him, let him go. You are too late, madame. The orders are issued. Well, should he be arrested, do they think they will arrest him? I hope so. If they should arrest him, I know that sometimes prisons afford means of escape. Will you leave him in prison? The procureur shook his head. At least keep him there till my daughter be married. Impossible, madame. Justice has its formalities. What, even for me? Said the Baroness, half jesting, half in earnest. For all, even for myself among the rest, replied Villefort. Ah, exclaimed the Baroness, without expressing the ideas which the exclamation betrayed. Villefort looked at her with that piercing glance which reads the secrets of the heart. Yes, I know what you mean, he said. You refer to the terrible rumors spread abroad in the world, that the deaths which have kept me in mourning for the last 3 months, and from which Valentine has only escaped by a miracle, have not happened by natural means. I was not thinking of that, replied Madame Danglars quickly. Yes, you were thinking of it, and with justice. You could not help thinking of it and saying to yourself, you, who pursue crimes so vindictively, answer now, why are there unpunished crimes in your dwelling? The Baroness became pale. You were saying this, were you not? Well, I own it. I will answer you. Villefort drew his armchair nearer to Madame Danglars. Then, resting both hands upon his desk, he said in a voice more hollow than usual, there are crimes which remain unpunished because the criminals are unknown, and we might strike the innocent instead of the guilty. But when the culprits are discovered, Villefort here extended his hand toward a large crucifix placed opposite to his desk. When they are discovered, I swear to you, by all I hold most sacred, that whoever they may be, they shall die. Now, after the oath I have just taken, and which I will keep, madame, dare you ask for mercy for that wretch? But, sir, are you sure he is as guilty as they say? Listen, this is his description. Benedetto condemned at the age of 16 for 5 years to the galleys for forgery. He promised well, as you see, first a runaway, then an assassin. And who is this wretch? Who can tell? A vagabond, a Corsican, has no one owned him. No one, his parents are unknown. But who was the man who brought him from Lucca? Another rascal like himself, perhaps his accomplice. The Baroness clasped her hands. Villefort, she exclaimed in her softest and most captivating manner. For heaven's sake, madame, said Villefort, with a firmness of expression not altogether free from harshness, for heaven's sake, do not ask pardon of me for a guilty wretch. What am I? The law. Has the law any eyes to witness your grief? Has the law ears to be melted by your sweet voice? Has the law a memory for all those soft recollections you endeavor to recall? No, madame. The law has commanded, and when it commands, it strikes. You will tell me that I am a living being, and not a coda man, and not a volume. Look at me, madame, look around me. Has mankind treated me as a brother? Have men loved me? Have they spared me? Has anyone shown the mercy towards me that you now ask at my hands? No, madame, they struck me, always struck me. Woman, siren that you are, do you persist in fixing on me that fascinating eye which reminds me that I ought to blush? Well, be it so. Let me blush for the faults you know, and perhaps for even more than those. But having sinned myself, it may be more deeply than others, I never rest till I have torn the disguises from my fellow creatures and found out their weaknesses. I have always found them, and more, I repeat it with joy, with triumph, I have always found some proof of human perversity or error. Every criminal I condemn seems to me living evidence that I am not a hideous exception to the rest. Alas, 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 all the world is wicked. Let us therefore strike at wickedness. Villefort pronounced these last words with a feverish rage, which gave a ferocious eloquence to his words. But said Madame Danglars, resolving to make a last effort, this young man, though a murderer, is an orphan, abandoned by everybody. So much the worse, or rather, so much the better. It has been so ordained that he may have none to weep his fate. But this is trampling on the weak, sir. The weakness of a murderer, his dishonor reflects upon us. Is not death in my house? Oh, sir, exclaimed the Baroness, you are without pity for others. Well then, I tell you they will have no mercy on you. Be it so, said Villefort, raising his arms to heaven with a threatening gesture. At least delay the trial till the next assizes. We shall then have 6 months before us. No, madame, said Villefort, instructions have been given. There are yet 5 days left. 5 days are more than I require. Do you not think that I also long for forgetfulness? While working night and day, I sometimes lose all recollection of the past, and then I experience the same sort of happiness I can imagine the dead feel. Still, it is better than suffering. But, sir, he has fled. Let him escape inaction is a pardonable offense. I tell you it is too late. Early this morning the telegraph was employed, and at this very minute, sir, said the valet de chambre, entering the room, a dragoon has brought this dispatch from the Minister of the Interior. Villefort seized the letter and hastily broke the seal. Madame Danglars trembled with fear. Villefort started with joy. Arrested, he exclaimed. He was taken at Compagnie, and all is over. Madame Danglars rose from her seat, pale and cold. Adieu, sir, she said. Adieu, madame, replied the king's attorney, as in an almost joyful manner he conducted her to the door. Then, turning to his desk, he said, striking the letter with the back of his right hand, "Come, I had a forgery, 3 robberies, and 2 cases of arson. I only wanted a murder, and here it is. It will be a splendid session."
Chapter 100.
As the procureur had told Madame Danglars, Valentine was not yet recovered. Bowed down with fatigue, she was indeed confined to her bed, and it was in her own room, and from the lips of Madame de Villefort, that she heard all the strange events we have related. We mean the flight of Hugues and the arrest of Andrea Cavalcanti, or rather Benedetto, together with the accusation of murder pronounced against him. But Valentine was so weak that this recital scarcely produced the same effect it would have done had she been in her usual state of health. Indeed, her brain was only the seat of vague ideas, and confused forms, mingled with strange fancies, alone presented themselves before her eyes. During the daytime Valentine's perceptions remained tolerably clear, owing to the constant presence of M. Noirtier, who caused himself to be carried to his granddaughter's room and watched her with his paternal tenderness. Villefort also, on his return from the law courts, frequently passed an hour or 2 with his father and child. At 6 o'clock Villefort retired to his study. At 8 m. d'Avrigny himself arrived, bringing the night draught prepared for the young girl, and then M. Noirtier was carried away. A nurse of the doctor's choice succeeded them, and never left till about 10 or 11 o'clock, when Valentine was asleep. As she went downstairs, she gave the keys of Valentine's room to M. de Villefort, so that no one could reach the sick room excepting through that of Madame de Villefort and little Edward. Every morning Morel called on Noirtier to receive news of Valentine, and extraordinary as it seemed, each day found him less uneasy. Certainly, though Valentine still labored under dreadful nervous excitement, she was better, And moreover, Monte Cristo had told him when, half distracted, he had rushed to the Countess' house, that if she were not dead in 2 hours she would be saved. Now 4 days had elapsed, and Valentine still lived. The nervous excitement of which we speak pursued Valentine even in her sleep, or rather in that state of somnolence which succeeded her waking hours. It was then, in the silence of night, in the dim light shed from the alabaster lamp on the chimney-piece, that she saw the shadows pass and repass which hover over the bed of sickness, and fan the fever with their trembling wings. First she fancied she saw her stepmother threatening her, then Morrel stretched his arms towards her. Sometimes mere strangers, like the Count of Monte Cristo, came to visit her. Even the very furniture in these moments of delirium seemed to move, and this state lasted till about 3 o'clock in the morning, when a deep, heavy slumber overcame the young girl, from which she did not awake till daylight. On the evening of the day on which Valentine had learned of the flight of Huguenot and the arrest of Benedetto, Villefort having retired as well as Noirtier and d'Avrigny, her thoughts wandered in a confused maze, alternately reviewing her own situation and the events she had just heard. 11 o'clock had struck. The nurse, having placed the beverage prepared by the doctor within reach of the patient, and locked the door, was listening with terror to the comments of the servants in the kitchen, and storing her memory with all the horrible stories which had for some months past amused the occupants of the antechambers in the house of the King's attorney. Meanwhile an unexpected scene was passing in the room which had been so carefully locked. 10 minutes had elapsed since the nurse had left. Valentine, who for the last hour had been suffering from the fever which returned nightly, incapable of controlling her ideas, was forced to yield to the excitement which exhausted itself in producing and reproducing a succession and recurrence of the same fancies and images. The night lamp threw out countless rays, each resolving itself into some strange form to her disordered imagination, when suddenly by its flickering light Valentine thought she saw the door of her library, which was in the recess by the chimney-piece, open slowly, though she in vain listened for the sound of the hinges on which it turned. At any other time, Valentine would have seized the silken bell-pull and summoned assistance, but nothing astonished her in her present situation. Her reason told her that all the visions she beheld were but the children of her imagination, and the conviction was strengthened by the fact that in the morning no traces remained of the nocturnal phantoms, who disappeared with the coming of daylight. From behind the door a human figure appeared, but the girl was too familiar with such apparitions to be alarmed, and therefore only stared, hopping to recognize Morrel. The figure advanced towards the bed and appeared to listen with profound attention. At this moment a ray of light glanced across the face of the midnight visitor. "It is not he," she murmured, and waited in the assurance that this was but a dream, for the man to disappear or assume some other form. Still she felt her pulse, and finding it throb violently, she remembered that the best method of dispelling such illusions was to drink, for a draught of the beverage prepared by the doctor to allay her fever seemed to cause a reaction of the brain, and for a short time she suffered less. Valentine therefore reached her hand towards the glass, but as soon as her trembling arm left the bed, the apparition advanced more quickly towards her, and approached the young girl so closely that she fancied she heard his breath, and felt the pressure of his hand. This time the illusion, or rather the reality, surpassed anything Valentine had before experienced. She began to believe herself really alive and awake, and the belief that her reason was this time not deceived made her shudder. The pressure she felt was evidently intended to arrest her arm, and she slowly withdrew it. Then the figure, from whom she could not detach her eyes, and who appeared more protecting than menacing, took the glass, and walking towards the nightlight held it up, as if to test its transparency. This did not seem sufficient. The man, or rather the ghost, for he trod so softly that no sound was heard, then poured out about a spoonful into the glass, and drank it. Valentine witnessed this scene with a sentiment of stupefaction. Every minute she had expected that it would vanish and give place to another vision. But the man, instead of dissolving like a shadow, again approached her and said in an agitated voice, "Now you may drink." Valentine shuddered. It was the first time one of these visions had ever addressed her in a living voice, and she was about to utter an exclamation. The man placed his finger on her lips. "The Count of Monte Cristo," she murmured. It was easy to see that no doubt now remained in the young girl's mind as to the reality of the scene. Her eyes started with terror, her hands trembled, and she rapidly drew the bedclothes closer to her. Still, the presence of Monte Cristo at such an hour, his mysterious, fanciful, and extraordinary entrance into her room through the wall, might well seem impossibilities to her shattered reason. "Do not call anyone, do not be alarmed," said the Count. "Do not let a shade of suspicion or uneasiness remain in your breast. The man standing before you, Valentine, for this time it is no ghost, is nothing more than the tenderest father and the most respectful friend you could dream of." Valentine could not reply. The voice which indicated the real presence of a being in the room alarmed her so much that she feared to utter a syllable. Still, the expression of her eyes seemed to inquire, "If your intentions are pure, why are you here?" The Count's marvelous sagacity understood all that was passing in the young girl's mind. "Listen to me," he said, "or rather look upon me. Look at my face, paler even than usual, and my eyes, red with weariness. For 4 days I have not closed them, for I have been constantly watching you, to protect and preserve you for Maximilian." The blood mounted rapidly to the cheeks of Valentine, for the name just announced by the Count dispelled all the fear with which his presence had inspired her. "Maximilian!" she exclaimed, and so sweet did the sound appear to her that she repeated it, "Maximilian." "Has he then owned all to you, everything? He told me your life was his, and I have promised him that you shall live." "You have promised him that I shall live?" "Yes. But, sir, you spoke of vigilance and protection." "Are you a doctor?" "Yes, the best you could have at the present time, believe me. But you say you have watched," said Valentine uneasily. "Where have you been? I have not seen you." The Count extended his hand towards the library. "I was hidden behind that door," he said, "which leads into the next house which I have rented." Valentine turned her eyes away, and with an indignant expression of pride and modest fear, exclaimed, "Sir, I think you have been guilty of an unparalleled intrusion, and that what you call protection is more like an insult." "Valentine," he answered, "during my long watch over you, all I have observed has been what people visited you, what nourishment was prepared, and what beverage was served. Then, when the latter appeared dangerous to me, I entered, as I have now done, and substituted in the place of the poison a healthful draught, which, instead of producing the death intended, caused life to circulate in your veins." "Poison death!" exclaimed Valentine, half believing herself under the influence of some feverish hallucination. "What are you saying, sir?" "Hush, my child," said Monte Cristo, again placing his finger upon her lips. "I did say poison and death. But drink some of this." And the Count took a bottle from his pocket, containing a red liquid, of which he poured a few drops into the glass. "Drink this, and then take nothing more tonight." Valentine stretched out her hand, but scarcely had she touched the glass when she drew back in fear. Monte Cristo took the glass, drank half its contents, and then presented it to Valentine, who smiled and swallowed the rest. "Oh, yes," she exclaimed, "I recognize the flavor of my nocturnal beverage which refreshed me so much, and seemed to ease my aching brain. Thank you, sir, thank you." "This is how you have lived during the last 4 nights, Valentine," said the Count. "But oh, how I passed that time! Oh, the wretched hours I have endured, the torture to which I have submitted when I saw the deadly poison poured into your glass, and how I trembled lest you should drink it before I could find time to throw it away." "Sir," said Valentine, at the height of her terror, "you say you endured tortures when you saw the deadly poison poured into my glass. But if you saw this, you must also have seen the person who poured it. Yes. Valentine raised herself in bed and drew over her chest, which appeared whiter than snow, the embroidered cambric, still moist with the cold dews of delirium, to which were now added those of terror. You saw the person, repeated the young girl. Yes, repeated the Count. What you tell me is horrible, sir. You wish to make me believe something too dreadful. What? Attempt to murder me in my father's house, in my room, on my bed of sickness. Oh, leave me, sir. You are tempting me, you make me doubt the goodness of Providence. It is impossible. It cannot be. Are you the first that this hand is stricken? Have you not seen M. de Saint-Imran, Madame de Saint-Imran, Barrois, all fall? Would not M. Noirtier also have fallen a victim, had not the treatment he has been pursuing for the last 3 years neutralized the effects of the poison? Oh, heaven, said Valentine. Is this the reason why Grandpapa has made me share all his beverages during the last month? And have they all tasted of a slightly bitter flavor like that of dried orange peel? Oh, yes, yes. Then that explains all, said Monte Cristo. Your grandfather knows, then, that a poisoner lives here. Perhaps he even suspects the person. He has been fortifying you, his beloved child, against the fatal effects of the poison, which has failed because your system was already impregnated with it. But even this would have availed little against a more deadly medium of death employed 4 days ago, which is generally but too fatal. But who, then, is this assassin, this murderer? Let me also ask you a question. Have you never seen anyone enter your room at night? Oh, yes. I have frequently seen shadows pass close to me, approach and disappear, but I took them for visions raised by my feverish imagination, and indeed when you entered I thought I was under the influence of delirium. Then you do not know who it is that attempts your life? No, said Valentine, who could desire my death. You shall know it now then, said Monte Cristo, listening. How do you mean? Said Valentine, looking anxiously around. Because you are not feverish or delirious tonight, but thoroughly awake. Midnight is striking, which is the hour murderers choose. Oh, heavens, exclaimed Valentine, wiping off the drops which ran down her forehead. Midnight struck slowly and sadly. Every hour seemed to strike with leaden weight upon the heart of the poor girl. Valentine, said the Count, summon up all your courage. Still the beatings of your heart. Do not let a sound escape you and feign to be asleep. Then you will see. Valentine seized the Countess' hand. I think I hear a noise, she said. Leave me. Goodbye for the present, replied the Count, walking upon tiptoe towards the library door, and smiling with an expression so sad and paternal that the young girl's heart was filled with gratitude. Before closing the door, he turned around once more and said, not a movement, not a word. Let them think you asleep, or perhaps you may be killed before I have the power of helping you. And with this fearful injunction the Count disappeared through the door, which noiselessly closed after him.
Chapter 101.
Valentine was alone. 2 other clocks, slower than that of Saint Philippe du Roule, struck the hour of midnight from different directions, and excepting the rumbling of a few carriages all was silent. Then Valentine's attention was engrossed by the clock in her room, which marked the seconds. She began counting them, remarking that they were much slower than the beatings of her heart, and still she doubted. The inoffensive Valentine could not imagine that anyone should desire her death. Why should they? To what end? What had she done to excite the malice of an enemy? There was no fear of her falling asleep. One terrible idea pressed upon her mind, that someone existed in the world who had attempted to assassinate her, and who was about to endeavor to do so again. Supposing this person, wearied at the inefficacy of the poison, should, as Monte Cristo intimated, have recourse to steel, what if the Count should have no time to run to her rescue? What if her last moments were approaching, and she should never again see Morel? When this terrible chain of ideas presented itself, Valentine was nearly persuaded to ring the bell and call for help. But through the door she fancied She saw the luminous eye of the Count, that eye which lived in her memory, and the recollection overwhelmed her with so much shame that she asked herself whether any amount of gratitude could ever repay his adventurous and devoted friendship. 20 tedious minutes passed thus, then 10 more, and at last the clock struck the half-hour. Just then the sound of fingernails slightly grating against the door of the library informed Valentine that the Count was still watching, and recommended her to do the same. At the same time, on the opposite side, that is towards Edward's room, Valentine fancied that she heard the creaking of the floor. She listened attentively, holding her breath till she was nearly suffocated. The lock turned, and the door slowly opened. Valentine had raised herself upon her elbow and had scarcely time to throw herself down on the bed and shade her eyes with her arm. Then, trembling, agitated, and her heart beating with indescribable terror, she awaited the event. Someone approached the bed and drew back the curtains. Valentine summoned every effort and breathed with that regular respiration which announces tranquil sleep. "Valentine," said a low voice. The girl shuddered to the heart but did not reply. Valentine repeated the same voice. Still silent, Valentine had promised not to wake. Then everything was still, excepting that Valentine heard the almost noiseless sound of some liquid being poured into the glass she had just emptied. Then she ventured to open her eyelids and glance over her extended arm. She saw a woman in a white dressing gown pouring a liquor from a phial into her glass. During this short time Valentine must have held her breath, or moved in some slight degree, for the woman, disturbed, stopped and leaned over the bed, in order the better to ascertain whether Valentine slept. It was Madame de Villefort. On recognizing her stepmother, Valentine could not repress a shudder, which caused a vibration in the bed. Madame de Villefort instantly stepped back close to the wall, and there, shaded by the bed curtains, she silently and attentively watched the slightest movement of Valentine. The latter recollected the terrible caution of Monte Cristo. She fancied that the hand not holding the phial clasped a long, sharp knife. Then, collecting all her remaining strength, she forced herself to close her eyes. But this simple operation upon the most delicate organs of our frame, generally so easy to accomplish, became almost impossible at this moment. So much did curiosity struggle to retain the eyelid open and learn the truth. Madame de Villefort, however, reassured by the silence, which was alone disturbed by the regular breathing of Valentine, again extended her hand, and half hidden by the curtains succeeded in emptying the contents of the phial into the glass. Then she retired so gently that Valentine did not know she had left the room. She only witnessed the withdrawal of the arm, the fair round arm of a woman but 25 years old, and who yet spread death around her. It is impossible to describe the sensations experienced by Valentine during the minute and a half Madame de Villefort remained in the room. The grating against the library door aroused the young girl from the stupor in which she was plunged, and which almost amounted to insensibility. She raised her head with an effort. The noiseless door again turned on its hinges, and the Count of Monte Cristo reappeared. "Well," said he, "do you still doubt?" "Oh," murmured the young girl, "have you seen, alas?" "Did you recognize?" Valentine groaned. "Oh, yes," she said, "I saw, but I cannot believe." "Would you rather die then and cause Maximilian's death?" "Oh," repeated the young girl, almost bewildered, "can I not leave the house? Can I not escape?" "Valentine, the hand which now threatens you will pursue you everywhere. Your servants will be seduced with gold, and death will be offered to you disguised in every shape. You will find it in the water you drink from the spring, in the fruit you pluck from the tree." "But did you not say that my kind grandfather's precaution had neutralized the poison?" "Yes, but not against a strong dose. The poison will be changed, and the quantity increased." He took the glass and raised it to his lips. "It is already done," he said. "Brucine is no longer employed, but a simple narcotic. I can recognize the flavor of the alcohol in which it has been dissolved. If you had taken what Madame de Villefort has poured into your glass, Valentine, you would have been doomed. But exclaimed the young girl, why am I thus pursued? Why? Are you so kind, so good, so unsuspicious of ill, that you cannot understand Valentine? No, I have never injured her. But you are rich, Valentine. You have 200,000 livres a year, and you prevent her son from enjoying these 200,000 livres. How so? The fortune is not her gift, but is inherited from my relations. Certainly. And that is why M. and Madame de Saint-Emran have died. That is why M. Noirtier was sentenced the day he made you his heir. That is why you, in your turn, are to die. It is because your father would inherit your property, and your brother, his only son, succeed to his. Edward, poor child. Are all these crimes committed on his account? Ah, then you at length understand. Heaven grant that this may not be visited upon him. Valentine, you are an angel. But why is my grandfather allowed to live? It was considered that you dead, the fortune would naturally revert to your brother unless he were disinherited. And besides, the crime appearing useless, it would be folly to commit it. And is it possible that this frightful combination of crimes has been invented by a woman? Do you recollect in the arbor of the Hôtel des Postes, at Perugia, seeing a man in a brown cloak, whom your stepmother was questioning upon Aqua Tofana? Well, ever since then, the infernal project has been ripening in her brain. Ah, then, indeed, sir, said the sweet girl, bathed in tears, I see that I am condemned to die. No, Valentine, for I have foreseen all their plots. No, your enemy is conquered since we know her, and you will live, Valentine, live to be happy yourself and to confer happiness upon a noble heart. But to ensure this you must rely on me. Command me, sir, what am I to do? You must blindly take what I give you. Alas, were it only for my own sake, I should prefer to die. You must not confide in anyone, not even in your father. My father is not engaged in this fearful plot, is he, sir? Asked Valentine, clasping her hands. No, and yet your father, a man accustomed to judicial accusations, ought to have known that all these deaths have not happened naturally. It is he who should have watched over you, he should have occupied my place, he should have emptied that glass, he should have risen against the assassin. Spectre against spectre, he murmured in a low voice as he concluded his sentence. Sir, said Valentine, I will do all I can to live, for there are two beings who love me and will die if I die, my grandfather and Maximilian. I will watch over them as I have over you. Well, sir, do as you will with me. And then she added in a low voice, Oh heavens, what will befall me? Whatever may happen, Valentine, do not be alarmed. Though you suffer, though you lose sight, hearing, consciousness, fear nothing. Though you should awake and be ignorant where you are, still do not fear, even though you should find yourself in a sepulchral vault or coffin. Reassure yourself then and say to yourself, at this moment a friend, a father who lives for my happiness and that of Maximilian watches over me. Alas, alas, what a fearful extremity! Valentine, would you rather denounce your stepmother? I would rather die 100 times. Oh yes, die. No, you will not die, but will you promise me, whatever happens, that you will not complain but hope? I will think of Maximilian. You are my own darling child, Valentine. I alone can save you, and I will. Valentine, in the extremity of her terror, joined her hands, for she felt that the moment had arrived to ask for courage, and began to pray. And while uttering little more than incoherent words, she forgot that her white shoulders had no other covering than her long hair, and that the pulsations of her heart could be seen through the lace of her nightdress. Monte Cristo gently laid his hand on the young girl's arm, drew the velvet coverlet close to her throat, and said with a paternal smile, My child, believe in my devotion to you as you believe in the goodness of Providence and the love of Maximilian. Valentine gave him a look full of gratitude, and remained as docile as a child. Then he drew from his waistcoat pocket the little emerald box, raised the golden lid, and took from it a pastille about the size of a pea, which he placed in her hand. She took it and looked attentively on the Count. There was an expression on the face of her intrepid protector which commanded her veneration. She evidently interrogated him by her look. "Yes," said he. Valentine carried the pastille to her mouth and swallowed it. "And now, my dear child, adieu for the present. I will try and gain a little sleep, for you are saved." "Go," said Valentine. "Whatever happens, I promise you not to fear." Monte Cristo for some time kept his eyes fixed on the young girl, who gradually fell asleep, yielding to the effects of the narcotic the Count had given her. Then he took the glass, emptied 3 parts of the contents in the fireplace, that it might be supposed Valentine had taken it, and replaced it on the table. Then he disappeared, after throwing a farewell glance on Valentine, who slept with the confidence and innocence of an angel at the feet of the Lord.
Chapter 102.
The night light continued to burn on the chimney-piece, exhausting the last drops of oil which floated on the surface of the water. The globe of the lamp appeared of a reddish hue, and the flame, brightening before it expired, threw out the last flickerings which in an inanimate object have been so often compared with the convulsions of a human creature in its final agonies. A dull and dismal light was shed over the bedclothes and curtains surrounding the young girl. All noise in the streets had ceased, and the silence was frightful. It was then that the door of Edward's room opened, and a head we have before noticed appeared in the glass opposite. It was Madame de Villefort, who came to witness the effects of the drink she had prepared. She stopped in the doorway, listened for a moment to the flickering of the lamp, the only sound in that deserted room, and then advanced to the table to see if Valentine's glass were empty. It was still about a quarter full, as we before stated. Madame de Villefort emptied the contents into the ashes, which she disturbed that they might the more readily absorb the liquid. Then she carefully rinsed the glass, and wiping it with her handkerchief replaced it on the table. If anyone could have looked into the room, just then he would have noticed the hesitation with which Madame de Villefort approached the bed, and looked fixedly on Valentine. The dim light, the profound silence, and the gloomy thoughts inspired by the hour, and still more by her own conscience, all combined to produce a sensation of fear. The poisoner was terrified at the contemplation of her own work. At length she rallied, drew aside the curtain, and leaning over the pillow gazed intently on Valentine. The young girl no longer breathed. No breath issued through the half-closed teeth. The white lips no longer quivered, the eyes were suffused with a bluish vapor, and the long black lashes rested on a cheek white as wax. Madame de Villefort gazed upon the face so expressive even in its stillness. Then she ventured to raise the coverlet and press her hand upon the young girl's heart. It was cold and motionless. She only felt the pulsation in her own fingers and withdrew her hand with a shudder. One arm was hanging out of the bed. From shoulder to elbow it was molded after the arms of German Pillen-esque graces, but the forearm seemed to be slightly distorted by convulsion, and the hand, so delicately formed, was resting with stiff outstretched fingers on the framework of the bed. The nails, too, were turning blue. Madame de Villefort had no longer any doubt. All was over. She had consummated the last terrible work she had to accomplish. There was no more to do in the room, so the poisoner retired stealthily, as though fearing to hear the sound of her own footsteps. But as she withdrew, she still held aside the curtain, absorbed in the irresistible attraction always exerted by the picture of death, so long as it is merely mysterious and does not excite disgust. The minutes passed. Madame de Villefort could not drop the curtain which she held like a funeral pall over the head of Valentine. She was lost in reverie, and the reverie of crime is remorse. Just then the lamp again flickered. The noise startled Madame de Villefort, who shuddered and dropped the curtain. Immediately afterwards the light expired, and the room was plunged in frightful obscurity, while the clock at that minute struck 4:30. Overpowered with agitation, the poisoner succeeded in groping her way to the door, and reached her room in an agony of fear. The darkness lasted 2 hours longer. Then by degrees a cold light crept through the Venetian blinds, until at length it revealed the objects in the room. About this time the nurse's cough was heard on the stairs, and the woman entered the room with a cup in her hand. To the tender eye of a father or a lover, the first glance would have sufficed to reveal Valentine's condition, but to this hireling, Valentine only appeared to sleep. "Good," she exclaimed, approaching the table. "She has taken part of her draught. The glass is 3/4 empty." Then she went to the fireplace and lit the fire, and although she had just left her bed, she could not resist the temptation offered by Valentine's sleep, so she threw herself into an armchair to snatch a little more rest. The clock striking 8 awoke her. Astonished at the prolonged slumber of the patient, and frightened to see that the arm was still hanging out of the bed, she advanced towards Valentine, and for the first time noticed the white lips. She tried to replace the arm, but it moved with a frightful rigidity which could not deceive a sick nurse. She screamed aloud, then running to the door exclaimed, "Help, help!" "What is the matter?" asked M.D. Avrigny at the foot of the stairs, it being the hour he usually visited her. "What is it?" asked Villefort, rushing from his room. "Doctor, do you hear them call for help?" "Yes, yes. Let us hasten up." It was in Valentine's room. But before the doctor and the father could reach the room, the servants who were on the same floor had entered, and seeing Valentine pale and motionless on her bed, they lifted up their hands towards heaven and stood transfixed, as though struck by lightning. "Call Madame de Villefort! Wake Madame de Villefort!" cried the procureur from the door of his chamber, which apparently he scarcely dared to leave. But instead of obeying him, the servant stood watching M.D. Avrigny, who ran to Valentine and raised her in his arms. "What, this one too?" he exclaimed. "Oh, where will be the end?" Villefort rushed into the room. "What are you saying, doctor?" he exclaimed, raising his hands to heaven. "I say that Valentine is dead," replied D. Avrigny in a voice terrible in its solemn calmness. M. de Villefort staggered and buried his head in the bed. On the exclamation of the doctor and the cry of the father, the servants all fled with muttered imprecations. They were heard running down the stairs and through the long passages. Then there was a rush in the court. Afterwards all was still. They had, one and all, deserted the accursed house. Just then Madame de Villefort, in the act of slipping on her dressing gown, threw aside the drapery, and for a moment stood motionless, as though interrogating the occupants of the room, while she endeavored to call up some rebellious tears. On a sudden she stepped, or rather bounded, with outstretched arms towards the table. She saw D. Avrigny curiously examining the glass, which she felt certain of having emptied during the night. It was now 1/3 full, just as it was when she threw the contents into the ashes. The specter of Valentine rising before the poisoner would have alarmed her less. It was, indeed, the same color as the draught she had poured into the glass, and which Valentine had drunk. It was indeed the poison, which could not deceive M.D. Avrigny, which he now examined so closely. It was doubtless a miracle from heaven that, notwithstanding her precautions, there should be some trace, some proof remaining to reveal the crime. While Madame de Villefort remained rooted to the spot like a statue of terror, and Villefort, with his head hidden in the bedclothes, saw nothing around him, D. Avrigny approached the window, that he might the better examine the contents of the glass, and dipping the tip of his finger in, tasted it. "Ah," he exclaimed, "it is no longer brucine that is used. Let me see what it is." Then he ran to one of the cupboards in Valentine's room, which had been transformed into a medicine closet, and taking from its silver case a small bottle of nitric acid, dropped a little of it into the liquor, which immediately changed to a blood-red color. "Ah!" exclaimed D. Avrigny, in a voice in which the horror of a judge unveiling the truth was mingled with the delight of a student making a discovery. Madame de Villefort was overpowered. Her eyes first flashed and then swam. She staggered towards the door and disappeared. Directly afterwards the distant sound of a heavy weight falling on the ground was heard, but no one paid any attention to it. The nurse was engaged in watching the chemical analysis, and Villefort was still absorbed in grief. M. D'Avrigny alone had followed Madame de Villefort with his eyes, and watched her hurried retreat. He lifted up the drapery over the entrance to Edward's room, and his eye reaching as far as Madame de Villefort's apartment, he beheld her extended lifeless on the floor. "Go to the assistance of Madame de Villefort," he said to the nurse. "Madame de Villefort is ill." "But Mademoiselle de Villefort," stammered the nurse. "Mademoiselle de Villefort no longer requires help," said Avrigny, "since she is dead." "Dead, dead," groaned forth Villefort in a paroxysm of grief, which was the more terrible from the novelty of the sensation in the iron heart of that man. "Dead," repeated a third voice, who said Valentine was dead. The two men turned round and saw Morrel standing at the door, pale and terror-stricken. This is what had happened. At the usual time, Morrel had presented himself at the little door leading to Noirtier's room. Contrary to custom, the door was open, and having no occasion to ring, he entered. He waited for a moment in the hall and called for a servant to conduct him to M. Noirtier, but no one answered, the servants having, as we know, deserted the house. Morrel had no particular reason for uneasiness. Monte Cristo had promised him that Valentine should live, and so far he had always fulfilled his word. Every night the Count had given him news, which was the next morning confirmed by Noirtier. Still this extraordinary silence appeared strange to him, and he called a second and third time, still no answer. Then he determined to go up. Noirtier's room was opened, like all the rest. The first thing he saw was the old man sitting in his armchair in his usual place, but his eyes expressed alarm, which was confirmed by the pallor which overspread his features. "How are you, sir?" asked Morrel, with a sickness of heart. "Well," answered the old man by closing his eyes, but his appearance manifested increasing uneasiness. "You are thoughtful, sir," continued Morrel. "You want something. Shall I call one of the servants?" "Yes," replied Noirtier. Morrel pulled the bell, but though he nearly broke the cord, no one answered. He turned towards Noirtier. The pallor and anguish expressed on his countenance momentarily increased. "Oh," exclaimed Morrel, "why do they not come? Is anyone ill in the house?" The eyes of Noirtier seemed as though they would start from their sockets. "What is the matter?" "You alarm me. Valentine, Valentine." "Yes, yes," signed Noirtier. Maximilian tried to speak, but he could articulate nothing. He staggered and supported himself against the wainscot. Then he pointed to the door. "Yes, yes, yes," continued the old man. Maximilian rushed up the little staircase, while Noirtier's eyes seemed to say, "Quicker, quicker." In a minute the young man darted through several rooms, till at length he reached Valentine's. There was no occasion to push the door. It was wide open. A sob was the only sound he heard. He saw, as though in a mist, a black figure kneeling and buried in a confused mass of white drapery. A terrible fear transfixed him. It was then he heard a voice exclaim, "Valentine is dead." And another voice which, like an echo, repeated, "Dead, dead."
Chapter 103.
Villefort rose, half ashamed of being surprised in such a paroxysm of grief. The terrible office he had held for 25 years had succeeded in making him more or less than man. His glance, at first wandering, fixed itself upon Morrel. "Who are you, sir?" he asked, "that forget that this is not the manner to enter a house stricken with death? Go, sir, go." But Morrel remained motionless. He could not detach his eyes from that disordered bed and the pale corpse of the young girl who was lying on it. "Go, do you hear?" said Villefort, while D'Avrigny advanced to lead Morrel out. Maximilian stared for a moment at the corpse, gazed all around the room, then upon the two men. He opened his mouth to speak, but finding it impossible to give utterance to the innumerable ideas that occupied his brain, he went out, thrusting his hands through his hair in such a manner that Villefort and D'Avrigny, for a moment diverted from the engrossing topic, exchanged glances, which seemed to say, "He is mad." But in less than 5 minutes the staircase groaned beneath an extraordinary weight. Morel was seen carrying, with superhuman strength, the armchair containing Noirtier upstairs. When he reached the landing, he placed the armchair on the floor and rapidly rolled it into Valentine's room. This could only have been accomplished by means of unnatural strength supplied by powerful excitement. But the most fearful spectacle was Noirtier being pushed towards the bed, his face expressing all his meaning, and his eyes supplying the want of every other faculty. That pale face and flaming glance appeared to Villefort like a frightful apparition. Each time he had been brought into contact with his father, something terrible had happened. "See what they have done," cried Morel, with one hand leaning on the back of the chair and the other extended towards Valentine. "See, my father, see." Villefort drew back and looked with astonishment on the young man, who, almost a stranger to him, called Noirtier his father. At this moment, the whole soul of the old man seemed scented in his eyes, which became bloodshot. The veins of the throat swelled. His cheeks and temples became purple, as though he was struck with epilepsy. Nothing was wanting to complete this but the utterance of a cry. And the cry issued from his pores, if we may thus speak, a cry frightful in its silence. D'Avrigny rushed towards the old man and made him inhale a powerful restorative. "Sir," cried Morel, seizing the moist hand of the paralytic, "they ask me who I am, and what right I have to be here." "Oh, you know it, tell them, tell them." And the young man's voice was choked by sobs. As for the old man, his chest heaved with his panting respiration. One could have thought that he was undergoing the agonies preceding death. At length, happier than the young man, who sobbed without weeping, tears glistened in the eyes of Noirtier. "Tell them," said Morel in a hoarse voice, "tell them that I am her betrothed. Tell them she was my beloved, my noble girl, my only blessing in the world. Tell them, oh, tell them, that corpse belongs to me." The young man, overwhelmed by the weight of his anguish, fell heavily on his knees before the bed, which his fingers grasped with convulsive energy. D'Avrigny, unable to bear the sight of this touching emotion, turned away, and Villefort, without seeking any further explanation, and attracted towards him by the irresistible magnetism which draws us towards those who have loved the people for whom we mourn, extended his hand towards the young man. But Morel saw nothing. He had grasped the hand of Valentine, and unable to weep, vented his agony in groans as he bit the sheets. For some time nothing was heard in that chamber but sobs, exclamations, and prayers. At length Villefort, the most composed of all, spoke. "Sir," said he to Maximilian, "you say you loved Valentine, that you were betrothed to her. I knew nothing of this engagement, of this love, yet I, her father, forgive you, for I see that your grief is real and deep, and besides my own sorrow is too great for anger to find a place in my heart. But you see that the angel whom you hoped for has left this earth. She has nothing more to do with the adoration of men. Take a last farewell, sir, of her sad remains. Take the hand you expected to possess once more within your own, and then separate yourself from her forever. Valentine now requires only the ministrations of the priest." "You are mistaken, sir," exclaimed Morel, raising himself on one knee, his heart pierced by a more acute pang than any he had yet felt. "You are mistaken. Valentine, dying as she has, not only requires a priest but an avenger. You, M. de Villefort, send for the priest. I will be the avenger." "What do you mean, sir?" asked Villefort, trembling at the new idea inspired by the delirium of Morel. "I tell you, sir, that two persons exist in you. The father has mourned sufficiently. Now let the procureur fulfill his office." The eyes of Noirtier glistened, and D'Avrigny approached. "Gentlemen," said Morel, reading all that passed through the minds of the witnesses to the scene, "I know what I am saying, and you know as well as I do what I am about to say. Valentine has been assassinated." Villefort hung his head, D'Avrigny approached nearer, and Noirtier said yes with his eyes. "Now, sir," continued Morel, In these days no one can disappear by violent means without some inquiries being made as to the cause of her disappearance, even were she not a young, beautiful, and adorable creature like Valentine. Now, Le procureur du roi, said Morel with increasing vehemence, no mercy is allowed. I denounce the crime. It is your place to seek the assassin. The young man's implacable eyes interrogated Villefort, who, on his side, glanced from Noirtier to d'Avrigny. But instead of finding sympathy in the eyes of the doctor and his father, he only saw an expression as inflexible as that of Maximilian. Yes, indicated the old man. Assuredly, said d'Avrigny. Sir, said Villefort, striving to struggle against this triple force and his own emotion, sir, you are deceived. No one commits crimes here. I am stricken by fate. It is horrible indeed, but no one assassinates. The eyes of Noirtier lighted up with rage, and d'Avrigny prepared to speak. Morel, however, extended his arm and commanded silence. And I say that murders are committed here, said Morel, whose voice, though lower in tone, lost none of its terrible distinctness. I tell you that this is the fourth victim within the last 4 months. I tell you, Valentine's life was attempted by poison 4 days ago, though she escaped, owing to the precautions of M. Noirtier. I tell you that the dose has been double, the poison changed, and that this time it has succeeded. I tell you that you know these things as well as I do, since this gentleman has forewarned you, both as a doctor and as a friend. Oh, you rave, sir, exclaimed Villefort, in vain endeavoring to escape the net in which he was taken. I rave, said Morel. Well then, I appeal to M. d'Avrigny himself. Ask him, sir, if he recollects the words he uttered in the garden of this house on the night of Madame de Saint-Rand's death. You thought yourselves alone, and talked about that tragical death, and the fatality you mentioned then is the same which has caused the murder of Valentine. Villefort and d'Avrigny exchanged looks. Yes, yes, continued Morel, recall the scene, for the words you thought were only given to silence, and solitude fell into my ears. Certainly, after witnessing the culpable indolence manifested by M.D.E. Villefort towards his own relations, I ought to have denounced him to the authorities. Then I should not have been an accomplice to thy death, as I now am, sweet, beloved Valentine, but the accomplice shall become the avenger. This fourth murder is apparent to all, and if thy father abandon thee, Valentine, it is I, and I swear it, that shall pursue the assassin. And this time, as though nature had at least taken compassion on the vigorous frame, nearly bursting with its own strength, the words of Morel were stifled in his throat. His breast heaved. The tears, so long rebellious, gushed from his eyes, and he threw himself weeping on his knees by the side of the bed. Then d'Avrigny spoke. And I too, he exclaimed in a low voice, I unite with M. Morel in demanding justice for crime. My blood boils at the idea of having encouraged a murderer by my cowardly concession. Oh, merciful heavens, murmured Villefort. Morel raised his head, and reading the eyes of the old man, which gleamed with unnatural luster, he said, M. Noirtier wishes to speak. Yes, indicated Noirtier, with an expression the more terrible from all his faculties being scented in his glance. Do you know the assassin? Asked Morel. Yes, replied Noirtier, and will you direct us? Exclaimed the young man. Listen, M. d'Avrigny, listen. Noirtier looked upon Morel with one of those melancholy smiles which had so often made Valentine happy, and thus fixed his attention. Then, having riveted the eyes of his interlocutor on his own, he glanced towards the door. Do you wish me to leave? Said Morel sadly. Yes, replied Noirtier. Alas, alas, sir, have pity on me. The old man's eyes remained fixed on the door. May I at least return? Asked Morel. Yes, must I leave alone? Know whom am I to take with me? The procureur, know the doctor, yes. You wish to remain alone with M. de Villefort? Yes. But can he understand you? Yes. Oh, said Villefort, inexpressibly delighted to think that the inquiries were to be made by him alone. "Oh, be satisfied, I can understand my father." While uttering these words with this expression of joy, his teeth clashed together violently. D'Avrigny took the young man's arm and led him out of the room. A more than death-like silence then reigned in the house. At the end of a quarter of an hour, a faltering footstep was heard, and Villefort appeared at the door of the apartment where D'Avrigny and Morrel had been staying, one absorbed in meditation, the other in grief. "You can come," he said, and led them back to Noirtier. Morrel looked attentively on Villefort. His face was livid, large drops rolled down his face, and in his fingers he held the fragments of a quill pen which he had torn to atoms. "Gentlemen," he said in a hoarse voice, "give me your word of honor that this horrible secret shall forever remain buried amongst ourselves." The two men drew back. "I entreat you," continued Villefort. "But," said Morrel, "the culprit, the murderer, the assassin—" "Do not alarm yourself, sir. Justice will be done," said Villefort. "My father has revealed the culprit's name. My father thirsts for revenge as much as you do, yet even he conjures you as I do to keep this secret." "Do you not, father?" "Yes," resolutely replied Noirtier. Morrel suffered an exclamation of horror and surprise to escape him. "Oh, sir," said Villefort, arresting Maximilian by the arm, "if my father, the inflexible man, makes this request, it is because he knows, be assured, that Valentine will be terribly revenged. Is it not so, father?" The old man made a sign in the affirmative. Villefort continued, "He knows me, and I have pledged my word to him. Rest assured, gentlemen, that within 3 days, in a less time than justice would demand, the revenge I shall have taken for the murder of my child will be such as to make the boldest heart tremble." And as he spoke these words, he ground his teeth and grasped the old man's senseless hand. "Will this promise be fulfilled, M. Noirtier?" asked Morrel, while D'Avrigny looked inquiringly. "Yes," replied Noirtier with an expression of sinister joy. "Swear, then," said Villefort, joining the hands of Morrel and D'Avrigny, "swear that you will spare the honor of my house, and leave me to avenge my child." D'Avrigny turned round and uttered a very feeble yes, but Morrel, disengaging his hand, rushed to the bed, and after having pressed the cold lips of Valentine with his own, hurriedly left, uttering a long, deep groan of despair and anguish. We have before stated that all the servants had fled. M. de Villefort was therefore obliged to request M. D'Avrigny to superintend all the arrangements consequent upon a death in a large city, more especially a death under such suspicious circumstances. It was something terrible to witness the silent agony, the mute despair of Noirtier, whose tears silently rolled down his cheeks. Villefort retired to his study, and D'Avrigny left to summon the doctor of the mayoralty, whose office it is to examine bodies after decease, and who is expressly named the doctor of the dead. M. Noirtier could not be persuaded to quit his grandchild. At the end of a quarter of an hour M. D'Avrigny returned with his associate. They found the outer gate closed, and not a servant remaining in the house. Villefort himself was obliged to open to them, but he stopped on the landing. He had not the courage to again visit the death chamber. The two doctors, therefore, entered the room alone. Noirtier was near the bed, pale, motionless, and silent as the corpse. The district doctor approached with the indifference of a man accustomed to spend half his time amongst the dead. He then lifted the sheet which was placed over the face, and just unclosed the lips. "Alas," said Avrigny, "she is indeed dead, poor child." "Yes," answered the doctor laconically, dropping the sheet he had raised. Noirtier uttered a kind of hoarse, rattling sound. The old man's eyes sparkled, and the good doctor understood that he wished to behold his child. He therefore approached the bed, and while his companion was dipping the fingers with which he had touched the lips of the corpse in chloride of lime, he uncovered the calm and pale face, which looked like that of a sleeping angel. A tear which appeared in the old man's eye expressed his thanks to the doctor. The doctor of the dead then laid his permit on the corner of the table, and having fulfilled his duty, was conducted out by d'Avrigny. Villefort met them at the door of his study. Having in a few words thanked the district doctor, he turned to d'Avrigny and said, "And now the priest. Is there any particular priest you wish to pray with Valentine?" asked d'Avrigny. "No," said Villefort, "fetch the nearest." "The nearest," said the district doctor, "is a good Italian abbé who lives next door to you. Shall I call on him as I pass?" "D'Avrigny," said Villefort, "be so kind, I beseech you, as to accompany this gentleman. Here is the key of the door, so that you can go in and out as you please. You will bring the priest with you, and will oblige me by introducing him into my child's room. Do you wish to see him?" "I only wish to be alone. You will excuse me, will you not? A priest can understand a father's grief." And M. de Villefort, giving the key to d'Avrigny, again bade farewell to the strange doctor and retired to his study, where he began to work. For some temperaments work is a remedy for all afflictions. As the doctors entered the street, they saw a man in a cassock standing on the threshold of the next door. "This is the abbé of whom I spoke," said the doctor to d'Avrigny. D'Avrigny accosted the priest. "Sir," he said, "are you disposed to confer a great obligation on an unhappy father who has just lost his daughter? I mean M.D.E. Villefort, the king's attorney." "Ah," said the priest, in a marked Italian accent. "Yes, I have heard that death is in that house." "Then I need not tell you what kind of service he requires of you." "I was about to offer myself, sir," said the priest. "It is our mission to forestall our duties. It is a young girl." "I know it, sir. The servants who fled from the house informed me. I also know that her name is Valentine, and I have already prayed for her." "Thank you, sir," said Avrigny. "Since you have commenced your sacred office, deign to continue it. Come and watch by the dead, and all the wretched family will be grateful to you. I am going, sir, and I do not hesitate to say that no prayers will be more fervent than mine." D'Avrigny took the priest's hand, and without meeting Villefort, who was engaged in his study, they reached Valentine's room, which on the following night was to be occupied by the undertakers. On entering the room, Noirtier's eyes met those of the abbé, and no doubt he read some particular expression in them, for he remained in the room. D'Avrigny recommended the attention of the priest to the living as well as to the dead, and the abbé promised to devote his prayers to Valentine and his attentions to Noirtier. In order, doubtless, that he might not be disturbed while fulfilling his sacred mission, the priest rose as soon as d'Avrigny departed, and not only bolted the door through which the doctor had just left, but also that leading to Madame de Villefort's room.
Chapter 104.
The next morning dawned dull and cloudy. During the night the undertakers had executed their melancholy office, and wrapped the corpse in the winding sheet, which, whatever may be said about the equality of death, is at least a last proof of the luxury so pleasing in life. This winding sheet was nothing more than a beautiful piece of cambric, which the young girl had bought a fortnight before. During the evening 2 men, engaged for the purpose, had carried Noirtier from Valentine's room into his own, and contrary to all expectation, there was no difficulty in withdrawing him from his child. The Abbé Busoni had watched till daylight, and then left without calling anyone. D'Avrigny returned about 8 o'clock in the morning. He met Villefort on his way to Noirtier's room, and accompanied him to see how the old man had slept. They found him in the large armchair, which served him for a bed, enjoying a calm, nay, almost a smiling sleep. They both stood in amazement at the door. "See," said Avrigny to Villefort, "nature knows how to alleviate the deepest sorrow. No one can say that M. Noirtier did not love his child, and yet he sleeps." "Yes, you are right," replied Villefort, surprised. "He sleeps indeed. And this is the more strange, since the least contradiction keeps him awake all night." "Grief has stunned him," replied d'Avrigny, and they both returned thoughtfully to the procuror's study. "See, I have not slept," said Villefort, showing his undisturbed bed. "Grief does not stun me. I have not been in bed for 2 nights. But then look at my desk. See what I have written during these 2 days and nights. I have filled those papers and have made out the accusation against the assassin Benedetto. Oh, work, work, my passion, my joy, my delight. It is for thee to alleviate my sorrows." And he convulsively grasped the hand of d'Avrigny. "Do you require my services now?" asked d'Avrigny. "No," said Villefort, "only return again at 11 o'clock. At 12 the heavens, my poor, poor child." And the procureur, again becoming a man, lifted up his eyes and groaned. "Shall you be present in the reception room?" "No, I have a cousin who has undertaken this sad office. I shall work, doctor. When I work I forget everything." And indeed, no sooner had the doctor left the room than he was again absorbed in work. On the doorsteps d'Avrigny met the cousin whom Villefort had mentioned, a personage as insignificant in our story as in the world. He occupied one of those beings designed from their birth to make themselves useful to others. He was punctual, dressed in black, with crape around his hat, and presented himself at his cousin's with a face made up for the occasion, and which he could alter as might be required. At 11 o'clock, the morning coaches rolled into the paved court, and the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honore was filled with a crowd of idlers, equally pleased to witness the festivities or the mourning of the rich, and who rush with the same avidity to a funeral procession as to the marriage of a duchess. Gradually the reception-room filled, and some of our old friends made their appearance. We mean Debray, Ch. Torenaud, and Beauchamp, accompanied by all the leading men of the day at the bar, in literature, or the army. For M. de Villefort moved in the first Parisian circles, less owing to his social position than to his personal merit. The cousin standing at the door ushered in the guests, and it was rather a relief to the indifferent to see a person as unmoved as themselves, and who did not exact a mournful face or force tears, as would have been the case with a father, a brother, or a lover. Those who were acquainted soon formed into little groups. One of them was made of Debray, Ch. Torenaud, and Beauchamp. "Poor girl," said Debray, like the rest, paying an involuntary tribute to the sad event. "Poor girl, so young, so rich, so beautiful. Could you have imagined this scene, Ch. Torenaud, when we saw her at the most 3 weeks ago about to sign that contract?" "Indeed, no," said Ch. Torenaud. "Did you know her?" "I spoke to her once or twice at Madame de Morcerf's. Among the rest, she appeared to me charming, though rather melancholy. Where is her stepmother? Do you know?" "She is spending the day with the wife of the worthy gentleman who is receiving us." "Who is he?" "Whom do you mean?" "The gentleman who receives us. Is he a deputy?" "Oh, no, I am condemned to witness those gentlemen every day," said Beauchamp, "but he is perfectly unknown to me." "Have you mentioned this death in your paper?" "It has been mentioned, but the article is not mine. Indeed, I doubt if it will please M. Villefort, for it says that if 4 successive deaths had happened anywhere else than in the house of the king's attorney, he would have interested himself somewhat more about it. Still," said Ch. Torenaud, "Dr. d'Avrigny, who attends my mother, declares he is in despair about it." "But whom are you seeking, Debray?" "I am seeking the Count of Monte Cristo," said the young man. "I met him on the boulevard on my way here," said Beauchamp. "I think he is about to leave Paris. He was going to his banker." "His banker? Danglars is his banker, is he not?" asked Ch. Torenaud of Debray. "I believe so," replied the secretary with slight uneasiness. "But Monte Cristo is not the only one I miss here. I do not see Morel." "Morel, do they know him?" asked Ch. Torenaud. "I think he has only been introduced to Madame de Villefort." "Still, he ought to have been here," said Debray. "I wonder what will be talked about tonight. This funeral is the news of the day. But hush, here comes our minister of justice. He will feel obliged to make some little speech to the cousin," and the 3 young men drew near to listen. Beauchamp told the truth when he said that on his way to the funeral he had met Monte Cristo, who was directing his steps towards the Rue de la Chausse d'Antin to M. Danglars. The banker saw the carriage of the Count enter the courtyard, and advanced to meet him with a sad, though affable smile. "Well," said he, extending his hand to Monte Cristo, "I suppose you have come to sympathize with me, for indeed misfortune has taken possession of my house. When I perceived you, I was just asking myself whether I had not wished harm towards those poor Morcerfs, which would have justified the proverb of he who wishes misfortunes to happen to others experiences them himself. Well, on my word of honor, I answered no. I wished no ill to Morcerf. He was a little proud, perhaps, for a man who, like myself, has risen from nothing, but we all have our faults. Do you know, Count, that persons of our time of life, not that you belong to the class, you are still a young man, but as I was saying, persons of our time of life have been very unfortunate this year. For example, look at the puritanical procureur who has just lost his daughter, and in fact nearly all his family in so singular a manner, Morcerf dishonored and dead, and then myself covered with ridicule through the villainy of Benedetto. Besides what? Asked the Count. Alas, do you not know? What new calamity? My daughter, Mademoiselle Danglars, Huguenot, has left us. Good heavens, what are you telling me? The truth, my dear Count. Oh, how happy you must be in not having either wife or children. Do you think so? Indeed I do. And so Mademoiselle Danglars, she could not endure the insult offered to us by that wretch, so she asked permission to travel. And is she gone? The other night she left, with Madame Danglars. No, with a relation. But still, we have quite lost our dear Huguenot, for I doubt whether her pride will ever allow her to return to France. Still, Baron, said Monte Cristo, family griefs, or indeed any other affliction which would crush a man whose child was his only treasure, are endurable to a millionaire. Philosophers may well say, and practical men will always support the opinion, that money mitigates many trials. And if you admit the efficacy of this sovereign balm, you ought to be very easily consoled, you, the king of finance, the focus of immeasurable power. Danglars looked at him askance, as though to ascertain whether he spoke seriously. Yes, he answered, if a fortune brings consolation, I ought to be consoled. I am rich. So rich, dear sir, that your fortune resembles the pyramids. If you wished to demolish them, you could not, and if it were possible, you would not dare. Danglars smiled at the good-natured pleasantry of the Count. That reminds me, he said, that when you entered I was on the point of signing 5 little bonds. I have already signed 2. Will you allow me to do the same to the others? Pray do so. There was a moment's silence, during which the noise of the banker's pen was alone heard, while Monte Cristo examined the gilt moldings on the ceiling. Are they Spanish, Haitian, or Neapolitan bonds? Said Monte Cristo. No, said Danglars, smiling. They are bonds on the Bank of France, payable to bearer. Stay, Count, he added, you, who may be called the Emperor if I claim the title of King of Finance, have you many pieces of paper of this size, each worth $1 million? The Count took into his hands the papers which Danglars had so proudly presented to him, and read, to the Governor of the Bank, please pay to my order from the fund deposited by me the sum of $1 million and charge the same to my account. Baron Danglars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, said Monte Cristo. 5 millions, why what a CR sus you are. This is how I transact business, said Danglars. It is really wonderful, said the Count. Above all, if, as I suppose, it is payable at sight. It is indeed, said Danglars. It is a fine thing to have such credit. Really, it is only in France these things are done. 5 millions on 5 little scraps of paper. It must be seen to be believed. You do not doubt it, no. You say so with an accent. Stay, you shall be convinced. Take my clerk to the bank, and you will see him leave it with an order on the treasury for the same sum. No, said Monte Cristo, folding the 5 notes, most decidedly not. The thing is so curious. I will make the experiment myself. I am credited on you for 6 millions. I have drawn 900,000 francs. You therefore still owe me 5,100,000 francs. I will take the 5 scraps of paper that I now hold as bonds, with your signature alone, and here is a receipt in full for the 6 millions between us. I had prepared it beforehand, for I am much in want of money today. And Monte Cristo placed the bonds in his pocket with one hand, while with the other he held out the receipt to Danglars. If a thunderbolt had fallen at the banker's feet, he could not have experienced greater terror. "What?" he stammered. "Do you mean to keep that money?" Excuse me, but I owe this money to the charity fund, a deposit which I promised to pay this morning." "Oh, well then," said Monte Cristo, "I am not particular about these 5 notes. Pay me in a different form. I wished from curiosity to take these, that I might be able to say that without any advice or preparation the house of Danglars had paid me 5 millions without a minute's delay. It would have been remarkable. But here are your bonds. Pay me differently." And he held the bonds towards Danglars, who seized them like a vulture, extending its claws to withhold the food that is being wrested from its grasp. Suddenly he rallied, made a violent effort to restrain himself, and then a smile gradually widened the features of his disturbed countenance. "Certainly," he said, "your receipt is money." "Oh dear, yes. And if you were at Rome, the house of Thomson and French would make no more difficulty about paying the money on my receipt than you have just done. Pardon me, Count, pardon me. Then I may keep this money." "Yes," said Danglars, while the perspiration started from the roots of his hair. "Yes, keep it, keep it." Monte Cristo replaced the notes in his pocket with that indescribable expression which seemed to say, "Come, reflect. If you repent there is still time." "No," said Danglars, "no, decidedly no. Keep my signatures. But you know none are so formal as bankers in transacting business. I intended this money for the charity fund, and I seemed to be robbing them if I did not pay them with these precise bonds. How absurd, as if one crown were not as good as another. Excuse me," and he began to laugh loudly but nervously. "Certainly, I excuse you," said Monte Cristo graciously, "and pocket them." And he placed the bonds in his pocketbook. "But," said Danglars, "there is still a sum of 100,000 francs. "Oh, a mere nothing," said Monte Cristo. "The balance would come to about that sum, but keep it and we shall be quits." "Count," said Danglars, "are you speaking seriously?" "I never joke with bankers," said Monte Cristo in a freezing manner which repelled impertinence, and he turned to the door just as the valet de chambre announced, "M. de Beauville, Receiver-General of the Charities." "Ma foi," said Monte Cristo, "I think I arrived just in time to obtain your signatures, or they would have been disputed with me." Danglars again became pale and hastened to conduct the Count out. Monte Cristo exchanged a ceremonious bow with M. de Beauville, who was standing in the waiting room, and who was introduced into Danglars' room as soon as the Count had left. The Count's serious face was illumined by a faint smile as he noticed the portfolio which the Receiver-General held in his hand. At the door he found his carriage, and was immediately driven to the bank. Meanwhile Danglars, repressing all emotion, advanced to meet the Receiver-General. We need not say that a smile of condescension was stamped upon his lips. "Good morning, creditor," said he, "for I wager anything it is the creditor who visits me." "You are right, Baron," answered M. de Beauville. "The charities present themselves to you through me. The widows and orphans depute me to receive alms to the amount of 5 millions from you." "And yet they say orphans are to be pitied," said Danglars, wishing to prolong the jest. "Poor things! Here I am in their name," said M. de Beauville. "But did you receive my letter yesterday?" "Yes, I have brought my receipt." "My dear M. de Beauville, your widows and orphans must oblige me by waiting 24 hours. Since M. de Monte Cristo, whom you just saw leaving here, you did see him, I think." "Yes, well, M. de Monte Cristo has just carried off their 5 millions." "How so?" "The Count has an unlimited credit upon me. a credit opened by Thomson and French of Rome. He came to demand 5 millions at once, which I paid him with checks on the bank. My funds are deposited there, and you can understand that if I draw out 10 millions on the same day, it will appear rather strange to the governor. 2 days will be a different thing, said Danglars, smiling. Come, said Beauville with a tone of entire incredulity, 5 millions to that gentleman who just left, and who bowed to me as though he knew me. Perhaps he knows you, though you do not know him. M. de Monte Cristo knows everybody. 5 millions, here is his receipt, believe your own eyes. M. de Beauville took the paper Danglars presented him, and read, received of Baron Danglars the sum of 5,100,000 francs, to be repaid on demand by the house of Thomson and French of Rome. It is really true, said M. de Beauville. Do you know the house of Thomson and French? Yes, I once had business to transact with it to the amount of 200,000 francs, but since then I have not heard it mentioned. It is one of the best houses in Europe, said Danglars, carelessly throwing down the receipt on his desk. And he had 5 millions in your hands alone. Why, this Count of Monte Cristo must be a nabob. Indeed, I do not know what he is. He has 3 unlimited credits, one on me, one on Rothschild, one on Lafitte. And you see, he added carelessly, he has given me the preference by leaving a balance of 100,000 francs. M. de Beauville manifested signs of extraordinary admiration. I must visit him, he said, and obtain some pious grant from him. Oh, you may make sure of him. His charities alone amount to 20,000 francs a month. It is magnificent. I will set before him the example of Madame de Morcerf and her son. What example? They gave all their fortune to the hospitals. What fortune? Their own M. de Morcerf S., who is deceased. For what reason? Because they would not spend money so guiltily acquired. And what are they to live upon? The mother retires into the country and the son enters the army. Well, I must confess, these are scruples. I registered their deed of gift yesterday. And how much did they possess? Oh, not much, from 12 to 1,300,000 francs, but to return to our millions. Certainly, said Danglars in the most natural tone in the world. Are you then pressed for this money? Yes, for the examination of our cash takes place tomorrow. Tomorrow? Why did you not tell me so before? Why, it is as good as a century. At what hour does the examination take place? At 2 o'clock. Send at 12, said Danglars, smiling. M. de Beauville said nothing, but nodded his head and took up the portfolio. Now I think of it, you can do better, said Danglars. How do you mean? The receipt of M. de Monte Cristo is as good as money. Take it to Rothschild S. or Lafitte S., and they will take it off your hands at once. What though payable at Rome? Certainly. It will only cost you a discount of 5,000 or 6,000 francs. The receiver started back. Ma foi, he said, I prefer waiting till tomorrow. What a proposition. I thought perhaps, said Danglars with supreme impertinence, that you had a deficiency to make up. Indeed, said the receiver, and if that were the case it would be worth while to make some sacrifice. Thank you, no, sir. Then it will be tomorrow. Yes, but without fail. Ah, you are laughing at me. Send tomorrow at 12 and the bank shall be notified. I will come myself. Better still, since it will afford me the pleasure of seeing you. They shook hands. By the way, said M. de Beauville, are you not going to the funeral of poor Mademoiselle de Villefort, which I met on my road here? No, said the banker. I have appeared rather ridiculous since that affair of Benedetto, so I remain in the background. Bah, you are wrong. How were you to blame in that affair? Listen, when one bears an irreproachable name, as I do, one is rather sensitive. Everybody pities you, sir, and above all, Mademoiselle Danglars. Poor Huguenot. Said Danglars, do you know she is going to embrace a religious life? No, alas, it is unhappily but too true. The day after the event, she decided on leaving Paris with a nun of her acquaintance. They are gone to seek a very strict convent in Italy or Spain. Oh, it is terrible. and M. de Beauville retired with this exclamation, after expressing acute sympathy with the father. But he had scarcely left before Danglars, with an energy of action those can alone understand who have seen Robert Macaire represented by Fr.D. Rick, exclaimed, "Fool!" Then enclosing Monte Cristo's receipt in a little pocketbook, he added, "Yes, come at 12 o'clock. I shall then be far away." Then he double-locked his door, emptied all his drawers, collected about 50,000 francs in banknotes, burned several papers, left others exposed to view, and then commenced writing a letter which he addressed to Madame la Baronne Danglars. "I will place it on her table myself tonight," he murmured. Then taking a passport from his drawer, he said, "Good, it is available for 2 months longer."
Chapter 105.
M. de Beauville had indeed met the funeral procession which was taking Valentine to her last home on earth. The weather was dull and stormy. A cold wind shook the few remaining yellow leaves from the boughs of the trees and scattered them among the crowd which filled the boulevards. M. de Villefort, a true Parisian, considered the cemetery of Père Lachaise alone worthy of receiving the mortal remains of a Parisian family. There alone the corpses belonging to him would be surrounded by worthy associates. He had therefore purchased a vault, which was quickly occupied by members of his family. On the front of the monument was inscribed, "The families of Saint-Emran and Villefort," for such had been the last wish expressed by poor Reine, Valentine's mother. The pompous procession therefore wended its way towards Père Lachaise from the Faubourg Saint-Honore. Having crossed Paris, it passed through the Faubourg du Temple, then leaving the exterior boulevards, it reached the cemetery. More than 50 private carriages followed the 20 mourning coaches, and behind them more than 500 persons joined in the procession on foot. These last consisted of all the young people whom Valentine's death had struck like a thunderbolt, and who, notwithstanding the raw chilliness of the season, could not refrain from paying a last tribute to the memory of the beautiful, chaste, and adorable girl, thus cut off in the flower of her youth. As they left Paris, an equipage with 4 horses at full speed was seen to draw up suddenly. It contained Monte Cristo. The Count left the carriage and mingled in the crowd who followed on foot. Tournaud perceived him and immediately alighting from his coupé, joined him. Beauchamp did the same. The Count looked attentively through every opening in the crowd. He was evidently watching for someone, but his search ended in disappointment. "Where is Morel?" he asked. "Do either of these gentlemen know where he is?" "We have already asked that question," said Tournaud, "for none of us has seen him." The Count was silent but continued to gaze around him. At length they arrived at the cemetery. The piercing eye of Monte Cristo glanced through clusters of bushes and trees, and was soon relieved from all anxiety, for seeing a shadow glide between the yew trees, Monte Cristo recognized him whom he sought. One funeral is generally very much like another in this magnificent metropolis. Black figures are seen scattered over the long white avenues. The silence of earth and heaven is alone broken by the noise made by the crackling branches of hedges planted around the monuments. Then follows the melancholy chant of the priests, mingled now and then with a sob of anguish, escaping from some woman concealed behind a mass of flowers. The shadow Monte Cristo had noticed passed rapidly behind the tomb of Abelard and H. Loci, placed itself close to the heads of the horses belonging to the hearse, and following the undertaker's men, arrived with them at the spot appointed for the burial. Each person's attention was occupied. Monte Cristo saw nothing but the shadow, which no one else observed. Twice the Count left the ranks to see whether the object of his interest had any concealed weapon beneath his clothes. When the procession stopped, this shadow was recognized as Morel, who, with his coat buttoned up to his throat, his face livid, and convulsively crushing his hat between his fingers, leaned against a tree, situated on an elevation commanding the mausoleum, so that none of the funeral details could escape his observation. Everything was conducted in the usual manner. A few men, the least impressed of all by the scene, pronounced a discourse, some deploring this premature death, others expatiating on the grief of the father, and one very ingenious person quoting the fact that Valentine had solicited pardon of her father for criminals on whom the arm of justice was ready to fall, until at length they exhausted their stores of metaphor and mournful speeches, elaborate variations on the stanzas of Malherbe to Du Rire. Monte Cristo heard and saw nothing, or rather he only saw Morel, whose calmness had a frightful effect on those who knew what was passing in his heart. "See," said Beauchamp, pointing out Morel to Debray. "What is he doing up there?" And they called C.H. Tournaud's attention to him. "How pale he is," said C.H. Tournaud, shuddering. "He is cold," said Debray. "Not at all," said C.H. Tournaud slowly. "I think he is violently agitated. He is very susceptible." "Bah," said Debray, "he scarcely knew Mademoiselle de Villefort. You said so yourself." "True. Still I remember he danced 3 times with her at Madame de Morcerf's. Do you recollect that ball, Count, where you produced such an effect?" "No, I do not," replied Monte Cristo, without even knowing of what or to whom he was speaking, so much was he occupied in watching Morel, who was holding his breath with emotion. "The discourse is over. Farewell, gentlemen," said the Count unceremoniously, and he disappeared without anyone seeing whither he went. The funeral being over, the guests returned to Paris. C.H. Tournaud looked for a moment for Morel, but while they were watching the departure of the Count, Morel had quitted his post, and C.H. Tournaud, failing in his search, joined Debray and Beauchamp. Monte Cristo concealed himself behind a large tomb and awaited the arrival of Morel, who by degrees approached the tomb, now abandoned by spectators and workmen. Morel threw a glance around, but before it reached the spot occupied by Monte Cristo, the latter had advanced yet nearer, still unperceived. The young man knelt down. The Count, with outstretched neck and glaring eyes, stood in an attitude ready to pounce upon Morel upon the first occasion. Morel bent his head till it touched the stone, then clutching the grating with both hands, he murmured, "Oh, Valentine!" The Count's heart was pierced by the utterance of these 2 words. He stepped forward and touching the young man's shoulder said, "I was looking for you, my friend." Monte Cristo expected a burst of passion, but he was deceived, for Morel, turning round, said calmly, "You see, I was praying." The scrutinizing glance of the Count searched the young man from head to foot. He then seemed more easy. "Shall I drive you back to Paris?" he asked. "No, thank you." "Do you wish anything?" "Leave me to pray." The Count withdrew without opposition, but it was only to place himself in a situation where he could watch every movement of Morel, who at length arose, brushed the dust from his knees, and turned towards Paris, without once looking back. He walked slowly down the Rue de la Roquette. The Count, dismissing his carriage, followed him about 100 paces behind. Maximilian crossed the canal and entered the Rue Meslay by the boulevards. 5 minutes after the door had been closed on Morel's entrance, it was again opened for the Count. Julie was at the entrance of the garden, where she was attentively watching Penelon, who, entering with zeal into his profession of gardener, was very busy grafting some Bengal roses. "Ah, Count," she exclaimed, with the delight manifested by every member of the family whenever he visited the Rue Meslay. "Maximilian has just returned, has he not, madame?" asked the Count. "Yes, I think I saw him pass, but pray call Emmanuel." "Excuse me, madame, but I must go up to Maximilian's room this instant," replied Monte Cristo. "I have something of the greatest importance to tell him." "Go then," she said with a charming smile, which accompanied him until he had disappeared. Monte Cristo soon ran up the staircase conducting from the ground floor to Maximilian's room. When he reached the landing he listened attentively, but all was still. Like many old houses occupied by a single family, the room door was paneled with glass, but it was locked. Maximilian was shut in, and it was impossible to see what was passing in the room, because a red curtain was drawn before the glass. The Count's anxiety was manifested by a bright color which seldom appeared on the face of that imperturbable man. "What shall I do?" he uttered, and reflected for a moment. "Shall I ring?" No, the sound of a bell, announcing a visitor, will but accelerate the resolution of one in Maximilian's situation, and then the bell would be followed by a louder noise. Monte Cristo trembled from head to foot, and as if his determination had been taken with the rapidity of lightning, he struck one of the panes of glass with his elbow. The glass was shivered to atoms. Then, withdrawing the curtain, he saw Morrel, who had been writing at his desk, bound from his seat at the noise of the broken window. "I beg 1,000 pardons," said the Count. "There is nothing the matter, but I slipped down and broke one of your panes of glass with my elbow. Since it is opened, I will take advantage of it to enter your room. Do not disturb yourself, do not disturb yourself." And passing his hand through the broken glass, the Count opened the door. Morrel, evidently discomposed, came to meet Monte Cristo less with the intention of receiving him than to exclude his entry. "Ma foi," said Monte Cristo, rubbing his elbow, "it is all your servant's fault. Your stairs are so polished, it is like walking on glass." "Are you hurt, sir?" coldly asked Morrel. "I believe not, but what are you about there? You were writing." "Ah, your fingers are stained with ink." "Ah, true, I was writing." "I do sometimes, soldier though I am." Monte Cristo advanced into the room. Maximilian was obliged to let him pass, but he followed him. "You were writing," said Monte Cristo with a searching look. "I have already had the honor of telling you I was," said Morrel. The Count looked around him. "Your pistols are beside your desk," said Monte Cristo, pointing with his finger to the pistols on the table. "I am on the point of starting on a journey," replied Morrel disdainfully. "My friend," exclaimed Monte Cristo in a tone of exquisite sweetness. "Sir, my friend, my dear Maximilian, do not make a hasty resolution, I entreat you." "I make a hasty resolution," said Morrel, shrugging his shoulders. "Is there anything extraordinary in a journey?" "Maximilian," said the Count, "let us both lay aside the mask we have assumed. You no more deceive me with that false calmness than I impose upon you with my frivolous solicitude. You can understand, can you not, that to have acted as I have done, to have broken that glass, to have intruded on the solitude of a friend, you can understand that, to have done all this, I must have been actuated by real uneasiness, or rather by a terrible conviction. Morrel, you are going to destroy yourself." "Indeed, Count," said Morrel, shuddering, "what has put this into your head?" "I tell you that you are about to destroy yourself," continued the Count, "and here is proof of what I say." And approaching the desk, he removed the sheet of paper which Morrel had placed over the letter he had begun, and took the latter in his hands. Morrel rushed forward to tear it from him, but Monte Cristo, perceiving his intention, seized his wrist with his iron grasp. "You wish to destroy yourself," said the Count. "You have written it." "Well," said Morrel, changing his expression of calmness for one of violence, "well, and if I do intend to turn this pistol against myself, who shall prevent me, who will dare prevent me? All my hopes are blighted, my heart is broken, my life a burden, everything around me is sad and mournful. Earth has become distasteful to me, and human voices distract me. It is a mercy to let me die, for if I live I shall lose my reason and become mad. When, sir, I tell you all this with tears of heartfelt anguish, can you reply that I am wrong? Can you prevent my putting an end to my miserable existence? Tell me, sir, could you have the courage to do so?" "Yes, Morrel," said Monte Cristo, with a calmness which contrasted strangely with the young man's excitement. "Yes, I would do so." "You," exclaimed Morrel, with increasing anger and reproach, "you, who have deceived me with false hopes, who have cheered and soothed me with vain promises, when I might, if not have saved her, at least have seen her die in my arms. You, who pretend to understand everything, even the hidden sources of knowledge, and who enact the part of a guardian angel upon earth, and could not even find an antidote to a poison administered to a young girl. Ah, sir, indeed you would inspire me with pity, were you not hateful in my eyes. Moral, yes. You tell me to lay aside the mask, and I will do so, be satisfied. When you spoke to me at the cemetery, I answered you, my heart was softened. When you arrived here, I allowed you to enter. But since you abuse my confidence, since you have devised a new torture after I thought I had exhausted them all, then, Count of Monte Cristo, my pretended benefactor, then, Count of Monte Cristo, the universal guardian, be satisfied. You shall witness the death of your friend. And Moral, with a maniacal laugh, again rushed towards the pistols. And I again repeat, you shall not commit suicide. Prevent me, then, replied Moral with another struggle which, like the first, failed in releasing him from the Count's iron grasp. I will prevent you. And who are you, then, that arrogate to yourself this tyrannical right over free and rational beings? Who am I? Repeated Monte Cristo. Listen, I am the only man in the world having the right to say to you, Moral, your father's son shall not die today. And Monte Cristo, with an expression of majesty and sublimity, advanced with arms folded toward the young man, who, involuntarily overcome by the commanding manner of this man, recoiled a step. Why do you mention my father? Stammered he. Why do you mingle a recollection of him with the affairs of today? Because I am he who saved your father's life when he wished to destroy himself, as you do today, because I am the man who sent the purse to your young sister, and the pharaon to old Moral, because I am the Edmond Dantès who nursed you, a child, on my knees. Moral made another step back, staggering, breathless, crushed. Then all his strength gave way, and he fell prostrate at the feet of Monte Cristo. Then his admirable nature underwent a complete and sudden revulsion. He arose, rushed out of the room and to the stairs, exclaiming energetically, Julie, Julie, Emmanuel, Emmanuel. Monte Cristo endeavored also to leave, but Maximilian would have died rather than relax his hold of the handle of the door, which he closed upon the Count. Julie, Emmanuel, and some of the servants ran up in alarm on hearing the cries of Maximilian. Moral seized their hands, and opening the door exclaimed in a voice choked with sobs, on your knees, he is our benefactor, the savior of our father. He would have added Edmond Dantès, but the Count seized his arm and prevented him. Julie threw herself into the arms of the Count. Emmanuel embraced him as a guardian angel. Moral again fell on his knees and struck the ground with his forehead. Then the iron-hearted man felt his heart swell in his breast. A flame seemed to rush from his throat to his eyes. He bent his head and wept. For a while nothing was heard in the room but a succession of sobs, while the incense from their grateful hearts mounted to heaven. Julie had scarcely recovered from her deep emotion when she rushed out of the room, descended to the next floor, ran into the drawing-room with childlike joy, and raised the crystal globe which covered the purse given by the unknown of the all-ease de Malhin. Meanwhile, Emmanuel in a broken voice said to the Count, "Oh, Count, how could you, hearing us so often speak of our unknown benefactor, seeing us pay such homage of gratitude and adoration to his memory, how could you continue so long without discovering yourself to us? Oh, it was cruel to us, and dare I say it, to you also. Listen, my friends," said the Count, "I may call you so, since we have really been friends for the last 11 years, the discovery of this secret has been occasioned by a great event which you must never know. I wish to bury it during my whole life in my own bosom, but your brother Maximilian wrested it from me by a violence he repents of now, I am sure." Then turning around and seeing that Moral, still on his knees, had thrown himself into an armchair, he added in a low voice, pressing Emmanuel's hand significantly, "Watch over him." "Why so?" asked the young man, surprised. "I cannot explain myself, but watch over him." Emmanuel looked around the room and caught sight of the pistols. His eyes rested on the weapons, and he pointed to them. Monte Cristo bent his head. Emmanuel went towards the pistols. "Leave them," said Monte Cristo. Then walking towards Morrel, he took his hand. The tumultuous agitation of the young man was succeeded by a profound stupor. Julie returned, holding the silken purse in her hands, while tears of joy rolled down her cheeks, like dewdrops on the rose. "Here is the relic," she said. "Do not think it will be less dear to us now we are acquainted with our benefactor." "My child," said Monte Cristo, coloring, "allow me to take back that purse. Since you now know my face, I wish to be remembered alone through the affection I hope you will grant me." "Oh," said Julie, pressing the purse to her heart, "no, no, I beseech you do not take it. For some unhappy day you will leave us, will you not?" "You have guessed rightly, madame," replied Monte Cristo, smiling. "In a week I shall have left this country, where so many persons who merit the vengeance of heaven lived happily, while my father perished of hunger and grief." While announcing his departure, the Count fixed his eyes on Morrel, and remarked that the words, "I shall have left this country," had failed to rouse him from his lethargy. He then saw that he must make another struggle against the grief of his friend, and taking the hands of Emmanuel and Julie, which he pressed within his own, he said with the mild authority of a father, "My kind friends, leave me alone with Maximilian." Julie saw the means offered of carrying off her precious relic, which Monte Cristo had forgotten. She drew her husband to the door. "Let us leave them," she said. The Count was alone with Morrel, who remained motionless as a statue. "Come," said Monte Cristo, touching his shoulder with his finger, "are you a man again, Maximilian?" "Yes, for I begin to suffer again." The Count frowned, apparently in gloomy hesitation. "Maximilian, Maximilian," he said, "the ideas you yield to are unworthy of a Christian." "Oh, do not fear, my friend," said Morrel, raising his head and smiling with a sweet expression on the Count. "I shall no longer attempt my life." "Then we are to have no more pistols, no more despair." "No, I have found a better remedy for my grief than either a bullet or a knife." "Poor fellow, what is it?" "My grief will kill me of itself." "My friend," said Monte Cristo, with an expression of melancholy equal to his own, "listen to me. One day, in a moment of despair like yours, since it led to a similar resolution, I also wished to kill myself. One day your father, equally desperate, wished to kill himself too. If anyone had said to your father, at the moment he raised the pistol to his head, if anyone had told me, when in my prison I pushed back the food I had not tasted for 3 days, if anyone had said to either of us then, 'Live, the day will come when you will be happy, and will bless life,' no matter whose voice had spoken, we should have heard him with the smile of doubt, or the anguish of incredulity. And yet how many times has your father blessed life while embracing you? How often have I myself—" "Ah," exclaimed Morrel, interrupting the Count, "you had only lost your liberty. My father had only lost his fortune, but I have lost Valentine." "Look at me," said Monte Cristo, with that expression which sometimes made him so eloquent and persuasive. "Look at me. There are no tears in my eyes, nor is there fever in my veins, yet I see you suffer, you, Maximilian, whom I love as my own son. Well, does not this tell you that in grief, as in life, there is always something to look forward to beyond? Now, if I entreat, if I order you to live, Morrel, it is in the conviction that one day you will thank me for having preserved your life." "Oh, heavens," said the young man, "oh, heavens, what are you saying, Count? Take care, but perhaps you have never loved." "Child," replied the Count, "I mean as I love. You see, I have been a soldier ever since I attained manhood. I reached the age of 29 without loving, for none of the feelings I before then experienced merit the appellation of love. Well, at 29 I saw Valentine. For 2 years I have loved her. For 2 years I have seen written in her heart, as in a book, all the virtues of a daughter and wife. Count, to possess Valentine would have been a happiness too infinite, too ecstatic, too complete, too divine for this world, since it has been denied me. But without Valentine the earth is desolate." "I have told you to hope," said the Count. "Then have a care, I repeat, for you seek to persuade me. and if you succeed I should lose my reason, for I should hope that I could again behold Valentine." The Count smiled. "My friend, my father," said Morrel with excitement, "have a care, I again repeat, for the power you wield over me alarms me. Weigh your words before you speak, for my eyes have already become brighter and my heart beats strongly. Be cautious, or you will make me believe in supernatural agencies. I must obey you, though you bade me call forth the dead or walk upon the water." "Hope, my friend," repeated the Count. "Ah," said Morrel, falling from the height of excitement to the abyss of despair, "ah, you are playing with me, like those good, or rather selfish mothers who soothe their children with honeyed words, because their screams annoy them. No, my friend, I was wrong to caution you. Do not fear, I will bury my grief so deep in my heart, I will disguise it so, that you shall not even care to sympathize with me. Adieu, my friend, adieu." "On the contrary," said the Count, "after this time you must live with me, you must not leave me, and in a week we shall have left France behind us. And you still bid me hope. I tell you to hope, because I have a method of curing you. Count, you render me sadder than before, if it be possible. You think the result of this blow has been to produce an ordinary grief, and you would cure it by an ordinary remedy change of scene." And Morrel dropped his head with disdainful incredulity. "What can I say more?" asked Monte Cristo. "I have confidence in the remedy I propose, and only ask you to permit me to assure you of its efficacy." "Count, you prolong my agony." "Then," said the Count, "your feeble spirit will not even grant me the trial I request. Come, do you know of what the Count of Monte Cristo is capable? Do you know that he holds terrestrial beings under his control? Nay, that he can almost work a miracle? Well, wait for the miracle I hope to accomplish, or, repeated Morrel, "or take care, Morrel, lest I call you ungrateful. Have pity on me, Count. I feel so much pity towards you, Maximilian, that listen to me attentively if I do not cure you in a month. To the day, to the very hour, mark my words, Morrel, I will place loaded pistols before you, and a cup of the deadliest Italian poison, a poison more sure and prompt than that which has killed Valentine. Will you promise me? Yes, for I am a man and have suffered like yourself and also contemplated suicide. Indeed, often since misfortune has left me I have longed for the delights of an eternal sleep. But you are sure you will promise me this?" Said Morrel, intoxicated. "I not only promise but swear it," said Monte Cristo, extending his hand. "In a month, then, on your honor. If I am not consoled, you will let me take my life into my own hands, and whatever may happen you will not call me ungrateful. In a month, to the day, the very hour and the date is a sacred one, Maximilian. I do not know whether you remember that this is the 5th of September. It is 10 years today since I saved your father's life, who wished to die." Morrel seized the Count's hand and kissed it. The Count allowed him to pay the homage he felt due to him. "In a month you will find on the table, at which we shall be then sitting, good pistols and a delicious draught. But on the other hand, you must promise me not to attempt your life before that time." "Oh, I also swear it." Monte Cristo drew the young man towards him and pressed him for some time to his heart. "And now," he said, "after today, you will come and live with me. You can occupy Hayd's apartment, and my daughter will at least be replaced by my son." "Hayd," said Morrel, "what has become of her?" "She departed last night, to leave you. To wait for me. Hold yourself ready then to join me at the Champs-Élysées and lead me out of this house without anyone seeing my departure." Maximilian hung his head and obeyed with childlike reverence.
Will the weight of secrets shatter the soul, or will courage rise to meet the shadows? Can hope endure in a world cloaked in deception and despair? Discover the answers in next week's chapter. Join us Tuesday on Raining Book. Subscribe and tap the bell to follow every heart-pounding twist of fate and resilience. Tell us below, whose journey captivates you most? The steadfast hero forging a path through chaos, the enigmatic figure pulling strings from the shadows, or the quiet souls seeking light amidst darkness? Every like, comment, or share fuels our mission to bring stories as gripping and unforgettable as Dumas' masterpiece. Until then, keep your imagination alive for whispered plots and grand revelations. Happy listening.